you ready?
And he knew.
Sometimes I can't get through.
Thank you. Good evening. Welcome to the meeting of the Board of the Alameda County Water District Board of Directors for October 12th, 2017. This time we have roll call, please.
Director Sethy?
Here.
Akbari?
Here.
Gunther?
Here.
Huang? Here. And Weed?
Here. And Director Sethy, lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This time we have public comments for items that are not on our agenda. Is there anyone in the public who wishes to address the board? Please.
Hello, my name is Tara Henry, and I'm at 4414 Bidwell Drive in Fremont, California. I'm one of your customers. So I just wanted to quickly ask respectfully that you go back and look at a lovely report that was done by staff in April of 2016. You had a presentation on it, and it was actually to look at green energy alternatives. The recommendation was made that it would be a cost savings of millions of dollars over the lifetime of the assets or the purchase power agreement to actually install solar. And I respectfully request that you work with staff to establish a schedule to implement the recommendations that were in that report. And in addition to the excellent analysis that was in that report, I would ask that you direct staff to look at electric vehicle purchase for perhaps some of your meter readers. That's all in-town mileage, potentially could save money on gasoline, and it's also good for the environment, so that makes me happy. If that's all I had to say. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to address the board? We generally don't respond to items directly from the public at the meeting, but we can direct staff to ask that they look into it and if appropriate, direct it to a committee, which could then come to the board. It's been the practice of ACWD that nearly every agenda item is first run through a committee. If you could give your name and contact information to our staff, when that item does come up for committee, it would be an opportunity for you to address it in that venue and maybe go into far more detail.
I have the contact information.
Okay. Thank you. Next is the consent calendar. I would ask that item 4.4 not be on the consent calendar, and so that I can excuse myself. I own property within 450 feet of the development of Robeson Homes on the former Holy Family grounds, and so we'll have to excuse myself and leave the room. Do we have a motion to amend the consent calendar?
I'll make the motion to amend the consent calendar, and we're adding items. Oh, no. I can do it as the same motion, right, to remove an item and add item?
I believe so. Yeah, you can incorporate that all in the same.
And add item 5.1, 5.2, and 5.3 to the consent calendar.
And to remove item 4.4?
Yes.
Is there a second for that motion? I'll second. Roll call, please.
Director Sethy?
Aye.
Akbari?
Aye.
Gunther?
Aye.
Huang? Aye. And Weed?
Aye. Do we have a motion for the consent calendar as amended?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Seconded. Roll call, please.
Director Sethy?
Aye.
Akbari?
Aye.
Gunther?
Aye.
Huang? Aye. And Weed?
Aye. Hand the gavel to Director Sethy, the Vice Chair, as I depart on item 4.4.
We'll wait until Director Weed is sequestered here.
Okay.
Okay, so we will take up item 4.4. And do we need any review by the board on this matter? I think we can take a vote on it.
You would need a motion in a second.
Yeah.
I'll move the staff recommendation of item 4.4.
I'll second.
Directors Sethy,
Aye.
Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
and Huang.
Aye.
To you.
We have a request to move an item up to, which is the PFM investment review. I believe we have representatives from PFM here this evening, and help them start their commute earlier than they might otherwise. So, to our general manager.
Yes, this is the annual review that is provided to the board, and Mr. Wunderlich will provide an introduction for this item.
Sure, I'll make a few introductory comments, and then we do have a representative here from PFM to make a presentation. Generally, what I just would like to do here is a reminder for those who may be following the stock market or reviewing the performance of your own investments. You may have seen relatively healthy gains within the past year, but based on our investment policy here at the district, we have different priorities. Our priorities are first, really to make sure we don't lose money, two, to make sure we can access our money when needed, and then third, to try to earn a reasonable investment return. But because of those constraints in our approach to our investment portfolio, you may not see the performance over the past year that you may have seen through other avenues with different objectives. So with that lead-in, I'd like to introduce Mr. Isaac Chu, who's here from PFM to provide a presentation. Unfortunately, Monique Spike, with whom you may be familiar and also works on our portfolio, is ill this evening and not able to be with us.
And Mr. Chu, I believe, is also a customer of the district.
That is correct. Good evening, everyone. Once again, my name is Isaac Chu. I'm with PFM. I'm here to give you your fiscal year-end report. So here on the first page, we are showing the U.S. yield curve. The U.S. yield curve goes out to 30 years, which is indicated on the table on the right. On the left, we go out 5 years. Again, 5 years is California code, so we must invest within that 5-year maturity spectrum. So what you're seeing here on that dark blue June 30, 2017 line is the yield to maturities as of June 30, 2017, and below that in the dotted gray is the yield to maturities for June 30, 2016. And as you can see from the spread between the two, there is a significant uptick. As you can see on the table on the right, by all the positive green numbers, when we look at the year-over-year change, there has been a significant increase. What that increase essentially means is that you're moving into a period where income earning will go up. We've had 35 years of rates going down, and we hit an inflection point in 2016 where yields are now starting to go up. With that, please keep in mind, as yields move up, there's a natural relationship with the fixed income market. So as yields go up, market values go down. So for the past 35 years, we've had an environment with yields coming down, so market values have been going up. And now we are entering an environment where income is going to play a much bigger factor in the return. So earlier to Jonathan's comment regarding the equity markets, we are showing here the S&P 500, which is that gray chart on the top. You can see that it's up there pretty high, hitting all-time record highs. I believe year-to-date it's around 13.5%. The equity markets continue to climb. We're also showing here 10-year Treasury yields. Why 10-year Treasury yields? Well, at 10 years is typically where you start to see longer-term inflation and growth expectations being priced in. Typically, the 10-year Treasury yield and the domestic equity market move in tandem. As you can see here by the dotted line on the left where you see U.S. elections, they were actually moving together. That's a normal a relationship between 10-year Treasury yields and the U.S. equity markets. Then in December of 2016, we started to see a divergence, and then a further divergence as of March 2017. So what is this essentially saying is, at some point, we do expect a correction. Either 10-year Treasury yields will need to come up, or the S&P market will need to correct itself. We think that it's going to be a combination of the two, with the equity markets being somewhat overvalued in the U.S., so that will come down. As to when, that's the question that everyone would really, really like to know. As long as corporates continue to provide positive earnings, the stock market can continue to rise in the U.S. That being said, we have seen an uptick in 10-year Treasury yields, so we are starting to see 10-year Treasury yields start to move up.
Sir, so that those who are observing it, and put this in a context, how much money are we talking about and the length of the investments we're looking at? This is principally our cash
Yes.
holdings.
Again, so within California code, we look at 5 years and below. We're showing the 10-year again because that's where you start to see some inflation expectations being priced into the 10-year. Now, why is that important? Because when the Fed decides to raise or lower rates, they're looking at inflation. Currently, inflation expectations have come down quite a bit, which is one of the reasons that's driving this 10-year Treasury yield lower.
I understand the process, the total dollar amount that we're talking about, to give some reference so people understand how much money we're talking about.
So Director Weed, I believe we'll have some subsequent slides that will show the amount of the district's portfolio.
Sure.
Thank you.
So before I jump into the amount, I will highlight a couple of key items and accomplishments throughout the fiscal year that we're proud of. So on the left there, you'll see the list. At the top there, enhanced earnings. So again, in this rising interest rate environment, we've managed to provide investment income for the water district at $1.7 million for the fiscal year. The portfolio yield rose to 1.5%, and we outperformed the benchmark by 52 basis points. Again, the benchmark is the yardstick which we measure our performance by. We maintained a diversified portfolio of holdings, and throughout this period we also maintained your portfolio within compliance of the district's investment policy as well as California government code. During this year, we've kept the district informed of events impacting their investment program. We've also assisted with the district to increase efficiencies with regards to their banking services. And lastly, we've added dedicated resource staff to the district, myself being one of them, and we also added a dedicated analyst that works with Monique and I. On the right, highlighting some key investor strategies for the year specific to your portfolio. As Jonathan alluded to earlier, our primary goal is preservation of capital. With that being in mind, we had risk mitigation strategies, investing in high-quality assets. We managed your portfolio's duration, which is a risk measure of your portfolio, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then we did sector rotation and opportunistic management in order to try to increase yield. What that is essentially moving in and out of various sectors to try to find where there's the best value, and then also participating in new agency issues and other new corporate issues as they came to market. Here is your portfolio composition. So as of the end of June 30, 2017 for the fiscal year, we managed a total of $123,311 and $402 less LAIF, which is the state money market-like fund. You can see the balances there in the center column, and then the percentages of the total portfolio. And then also what's permitted by policy, and you can see on the right that we were in policy compliance the entire period.
123 million.
Sorry. So here, looking at the portfolio maturity distribution. So on the left there, you'll see the blue bars are overweight versus the gray bars. What the blue bars are your portfolio, and what the gray bars are your benchmark weights. You can see that we were short. We were overweight the shorter end, so the 1 to 2 year and the 0 to 1 year. Again, in this rising interest rate environment, it pays to be shorter on the maturity spectrum because of the increasing rates. You're able to capitalize by reinvesting in higher yields. When we do that, we end up moving the funds out to the right over towards that 4 or 5 years, so it becomes this laddered structure. On the top right there, we're looking at the duration number of your portfolio. So earlier I said the duration is a risk metric. Essentially what the duration is a calculation for your portfolio would be a 1 year duration, and you have a 1% change up in interest rates. That would be a 1% loss in market value. If interest rates move the other way, it would be a 1% drop in interest rates would mean a 1% raise in market value. So here you can see that your duration is actually shorter than the benchmark. So essentially, as interest rates go up, we're protecting your portfolio's assets. As a snapshot, we're showing here the credit quality and also the sector allocation of your portfolio. On the left is the credit quality pie chart. You can see that your portfolio is dominated by 81% being invested in AA. So the U.S. Treasury credit rating by the S&P standards is AA+. So your portfolio's average credit rating when you total all of the exposures up is AA, which is a very strong credit quality. On the right, you'll see there are many colors in this pie wheel. That's a good thing. That's diversification, which leads to risk-adjusted returns. And as again, you can see through those weights that your portfolio was in compliance during the period. Here, we're just highlighting the sector allocation over time. So this is capturing a little bit of the sector rotation that we talked about. On the far left, you can see that your portfolio was mostly U.S. Treasuries, federal agencies, and corporate notes. And over the years, we've added certificates of deposit, municipal securities, and also federal agency CMOs, which are mortgage-backed securities. We hope to continue to diversify and add more colors, and this is the active management of the portfolio. So this is the portfolio manager making decisions on where to invest within the framework of the investment policy. With regards to income earned, so these are actual dollars earned by the district. You can see that the actual dollars earned has increased over the years, over the fiscal years. On the right there, we're showing the fiscal year for 2017. Your portfolio earned $1.7 million that year with a 1.5% yield, compared to fiscal year 2016, which was $1.3 million in actual dollars earned and a portfolio yield of 1.43. So looking at earnings and return on a different lens is total return. So total return is a different concept, but it includes both earnings, unrealized earnings, and realized earnings. So what we're looking at here is total return, and that formula is the change in market value, which is unrealized, plus interest income earned, plus realized gains and losses. So what you can see here on the left, for your fiscal year, your benchmark return was negative 53 basis points. And your portfolio was pretty much flat with a negative 1 basis point return. So that's that downside risk mitigation, that protection, that preservation of capital that we look to achieve. December of 2016 was the toughest month for fixed income. Rates really moved significantly post the presidential election, and again, that rate increase caused market values to decline. But in your portfolio, we managed to protect the market value, which is why you see an outperformance of 52 basis points. If we look to the 3-year number and also the since inception, you'll see that we've outperformed the benchmark through those periods as well. So where do we think the market is going, and where do we expect your portfolio to go? So as we think about the portfolio, we have to think about the general economy. Our current outlook is we expect modest economic growth. That's somewhat now adjusted. We still think we're heading towards modest economic growth. However, we're trying to assess what the actual impact will be from the hurricanes. We expect that the hurricanes may have around a possible 1% impact to GDP. As for employment, the employment numbers look healthy despite the hurricanes. The employment numbers have continued to improve, which is a good thing. We are monitoring inflation again, because inflation will lead potentially to further rate increases by the Fed. Here we're showing the future interest rate hike possibility at 33% as of August 31st. Now, just to highlight how much this moves, the probabilities, you can see from June 30, the probability of a Fed rate hike at the December 13, 2017 meeting was at 52%. Then in August, it's at 33%. In just September, it dropped to 22%. And in the 1 month, it moved from 22% up to 77% today. So the probability of a further rate hike in December by the market is now at 77%. So we think that's a pretty good chance. So what we'll do is we'll keep your portfolio duration shorter than the benchmark again to protect your assets. On the right, again, just highlighting the interest rate environment that we're in. We are watching the fiscal policy and also monetary policies as those will affect your portfolio. We will maintain a neutral duration posture, and as we come closer to a more definitive probability of a Fed rate hike, will allow your portfolio to drift down, so become shorter, and then we will extend, capturing some of the higher interest rate environment. Lastly, we'll continue to identify opportunities to invest to increase that yield, as we've been doing for your portfolio. Any questions?
Thank you. Are there questions from the board?
I have a comment to make, if I may.
Can you go back to the slides? Yeah. I don't have any questions. I just didn't have a chance to review it in detail.
So, I just wanted to note for the record that up until a handful of years ago, we were managing all of our investments in-house. And as chair of the Finance Committee the last 6 years or so, one of the things that Director Weed and I did was to encourage us to go to an outside investment manager. And I just want to express the fact that we've been really pleased with the performance results. The cost effectiveness has been really good for us. And we're able to do things that, for our ratepayers and the public here, that we were not able to do earlier as an agency, such as the diversification of our portfolio and exercising judgment on when to make calls in the market, you know, really on a day-to-day basis, whereas in the past we were doing it more on a quarterly or semi-annual basis. So the ability of this agency to react in real time to what's going on in the markets is very important. And as you noted, when the expectations for a rate increase were at 22% in September, and all of a sudden it's up to 77%, the market's turning on a dime here, and you have to react quickly. So I just want to express my appreciation for all the efforts that PFM has done, and the really satisfactory investment returns that we've received under your management.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Well, again, thank you for your services on this. I would note that our budgeting sometimes lags your performance, and I would encourage us to review our budget for this coming year to see if we're going to fully reflect the increased amount of money and revenues that you're experiencing in this market. Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for coming out.
Thank you, Isaac.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, we can now go back to the agenda, which is 5.4, in consideration of Alameda County Water District support of Department of Water Resources approval of California Water Fix project, otherwise known as the tunnels.
Thank you, President Weed. The state of California, the water community, several NGOs, and others are all very interested in what the Alameda County Water District decides to do on item 5.4 on this evening's agenda. Prior to the board meeting, I emailed you all information about recent state water contractor agency actions. In addition, you'll hear this later as well, staff just learned today that the Kern County Water Agency has also taken a support position on the California Water Fix project.
That's good news.
Surprising news.
So the item before you this evening is something that the board has been discussing literally for years. ACWD's potential commitment to the California Water Fix. Tonight staff will provide a review of the proposed project as well as some new information that we hope you will find to be helpful, especially on business case. In terms of this evening's requested board action, staff provides two options for the board's consideration in your packet. You may provide conditional support of California Water Fix by adopting the simple resolution that you have before you, or should the board not be comfortable with the resolution, alternatively, you may authorize the general manager to submit a letter of conditional support to the Department of Water Resources. The letter option is included in the event that the board wishes to convey additional information or concerns to DWR that we did not include in the draft resolution. It would likely be more efficient to provide direction to the general manager instead of attempting to draft resolution language at tonight's board meeting, which, depending on the issues raised, could be challenging to fine-tune that language. So that was the intent there. Of course, the board may also elect to take no action this evening, or even to oppose the project. For whatever reason, if the board is not ready to provide conditional support of the project, staff's recommendation is to take no action this evening and allow us to follow up with any concerns that you have. Water Resources Manager Stephen Inn will begin staff's presentation for you. In terms of the board receiving input from the public, I suggest that the board president allow for that public input immediately after the staff presentation.
Yes.
Should the board choose to support the project, I may have some questions for you so that we can issue a press release as soon as possible, as early as this evening.
In your scenario, it might it also be possible, if we do vote to approve, that we could also draft a letter for issues of concern that we have related to the Department of Water Resources and State Water Project, which go beyond the current scope of the California Water Fix.
It's possible that in the letter scenario that the board conveys a support position. And remember, if the board decides to support the project, it will be conditional support. It's based on assumptions, and we'll share those with you this evening. And the resolution also includes those assumptions. If we go with the letter approach, then certainly any additional input to DWR could be included in the letter in addition to a conditional support position, should the board choose to go that way.
Well, I'm suggesting if we did, on the very first option, that we could also accompany it with a letter of other concerns we have related to the water and issues.
Certainly. You can adopt a resolution, and then you can direct the general manager to do anything that is the board's pleasure, as always.
Thank you.
So, with that, I will pass this to Mr. Inn.
Thank you, Mr. Shaver. The State Water Project has been a very important component of the district's water supply portfolio for about 55 years now, and provides about 40% of the district's annual water supply. The State Water Project is also a vital part of the district's dry year supply because it provides access to the district's water that is banked in semi-tropic water storage district and provides water transfer opportunities. The combined export capability of both the State Water Project and Central Valley Water Project has been decreasing due to regulatory restrictions and outages associated with aging infrastructure. With existing and future likely regulatory constraints alone, the Department of Water Resources, or DWR, estimates that delivery capability could potentially fall as low as 48% of full contract amounts. Additionally, the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta is considered highly susceptible to a catastrophic levee failure from major seismic events, sea level rise, and other hazards. Such scenarios could result in interrupted delivery of the district's State Water Project supply for years. To address these issues, DWR proposes to construct California Water Fix. The California Water Fix process began in 2006 as the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. DWR analyzed 18 out of an original 100-plus action alternatives in Environmental Impact Report and Environmental Impact Statement process over a 9-year period in collaboration with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, state and federal fish and wildlife agencies, state and federal water contractors, non-governmental organizations, agricultural stakeholders, and the general public. In July 2015, the process identified alternative 4A, now known as California Water Fix, as the preferred alternative. 2 years later, on July 21st, 2017, DWR certified the final environmental analysis for the California Water Fix and signed the Notice of Determination approving California Water Fix as the proposed project. It is DWR's position that it has the authority to modify the State Water Project to construct, operate, and maintain California Water Fix as part of the State Water Project. And DWR and the state water contractors are requesting agencies to support DWR's approval of California Water Fix at this time. Staff has presented periodic updates on the California Water Fix project and on the process of developing a business case to the board since February 2016. Tonight, Thomas Neiser is here, our Water Supply and Planning Manager, and will provide an update on California Water Fix, an update on the business case, and provide the most recent available information regarding the position of other agencies on California Water Fix. I also would like to acknowledge that a good number of the water supply and planning staff are here tonight to witness the discussion on this very important topic. So in the front we have Sarah Mata, Devin Becker, a couple rows back is Megan Marino and Linda Vo. So with that, I'll turn that over to Thomas.
Thank you, Stephen. And I would just like to add that I didn't ask any of them to attend. They are here mostly out of, well, the fact that some of them have contributed a tremendous amount to the work that's gone into this and also just a genuine interest in the subject. So as was introduced, presentation tonight and potential action is for consideration of a sort of official position of support for DWR's approval of the California Water Fix project. The agenda for the evening will do a quick overview of a little bit of background on the Delta Water Fix proposal itself, an update to the business case that district staff has been working on since February of 2016, as well as staff's recommendation. So to start with, it'd be good to just explain a little bit about the Delta for the benefit of perhaps some folks here that are a little bit less familiar with it. This is how we get our water supply from the state. This is a northbound look at the Sacramento Delta, Sacramento-San Joaquin River Delta. And if you consider the basic facts that California gets 70% of its net precipitation north of Sacramento, yet 2/3 of the demand for that as potable water or agriculture water, even raw water, occurs south of Sacramento, starting right here in the Bay Area. And that's not just through the Delta. A lot of that's through existing peripheral canals, if you will, or pipelines that run through the Delta to provide water to the Bay Area. And then the majority of the State Water Project travels through the Delta itself by pumping it out at the State Water Project and CVP pumps. That's the Central Valley Project. That's the federal water project on the southern end of the Delta. And in order to do that, to run that water in the north end and to have it come out on the south, basically have to run these pumps so hard that it causes flows to actually reverse away from their natural path. That water from the Sacramento River would like to go out to the bay. So we pull that water down south, we pull it literally uphill, and in the process we pull a lot of things along with it, a lot of pollution from within the Delta, waste discharges from Sacramento. We pull pelagic fish, the smelt, which are free-floating fish that move with the water. They're not volitional swimmers. We have smolts trying to migrate out from the Sacramento River to the bay to grow in the ocean that are drawn to the South Bay. And in that process, many of them don't make it to the rest of complete their life cycle. And I'll point out that when we say 2/3 of the water supply is south of Sacramento, we're talking about 2/3 of the water supply for the 6th largest economy in the world. We rely to get that water through the Delta in a network of levees that were never engineered, are not state or federal agency built or supported, that protect islands that are below sea level and are currently sinking 15 to 30 feet already in many areas, actively sinking, and with the further sinking puts further stress on those levees. We have, while those islands are sinking, by the way, the sea is also rising, exacerbating the stress on those levees and the risk of failure. We have salt intrusion issues into the Delta as it is. This is a modeling depiction of what happens during a drought. This is very close to what happened in 2014 where when there's insufficient freshwater inflows to the delta, we get so much saltwater intrusion that it comes right into where our pumps are. If this happened in 2014, we would have been severely impaired in our deliveries. Our drought ordinance would have been further challenged. And finally, there's a huge potential threat of a massive salt intrusion from a massive earthquake scenario, which could be triggered by any one of a number of faults in the delta. Here's some modeling results that very graphically show what would happen on a 6.5 magnitude earthquake on the Hayward Fault. This one has about 20 of those islands collapsing, levees surrounding those islands. And what happens when those islands are already below sea level, if those levees collapse, they create a vacuum that's going to suck in water. It's going to bring it all in from the bay. And the second graphic shows very nicely the 30 days scenario of the entire delta turning brackish. The only way to clean that water out would be with excessive freshwater flows, and the only way we get that is from an awful lot of rain. The projected time that it could take is up to 5 years to flush that sort of water out, depending on how wet it is. So again, this is our water infrastructure for the 6th largest economy in the world. The California Water Fix takes a lot of these points head on. In particular, the details, as Stephen mentioned, there was over 100 alternatives originally considered. The preferred alternative 4A is a what's called dual conveyance concept. It does a combination of using the existing pathways through the delta as well as what is usually referred to as an isolated facility, which is separate from the delta surface water flows. In this case, this particular alternative, the isolated component would be two 40-foot diameter tunnels bored underneath the delta, about upwards of, or at their deepest point, about 150 feet below the surface, and at a length of over 40 miles. And they would have a bank of 3,000 CFS screened intakes on the north end of the delta on the Sacramento River. And just a little closer look at what that looks like. The proposed intakes right here north of the delta itself, outside of the salt intrusion zone, tunneling out to the existing Clifton Court forebay, which would be modified as part of the project, and then into the existing state and federal water project pumps. Now, to have some frame of reference, what we're really talking about, taking water, if you kind of look back to that previous graphic, it's water traveling from the same place in the north to the same place in the south, but instead of through this branch network of surface canals and rivers, is largely through a tunnel, or a pair of tunnels. As mentioned, on the north end of that delta, there would be a full bank of fish screens, which would have proactive protection for fish with a non-salvage. We'll use that term a couple times tonight. The existing facilities at the south end of the delta at the pumping plants are called a salvage facility. When young fish, smolts and smelt, are pulled into those screens, they're literally collected and then returned to another location, whereas the fish screening on the Sacramento River would be more akin to what we have on Alameda Creek, that has a passive and a bypass flow, where the fish would never actually be entrained against the screen. They would actually be able to swim past those screens. It's a much more environmentally friendly, it's the current standard, basically. Some of the benefits of Cal Water Fix would, and I like to emphasize, frankly, would improve and protect water supply and our water quality against salt intrusion, both due to current risks such as flooding and earthquake, but also the climate change-induced sea level rise. So this is both an immediate protection as well as preparing for long-term protection to address climate change. Would improve the reliability by being able to capture surplus flows in the north end of the delta when available, when the south end is restricted for pumping due to internal environmental conditions within the delta. When the south delta pumps just can't be run, you'd be able to capture surplus water if it's available on the Sacramento River. So instead of having one place to take water, there'll be two, but this new one is in the place where most of the water is in the first place. And it would be more protective of endangered native fish species than our current system, for the reasons I mentioned, the fish screens, the non-reversal of flows, as well as being able to take in an area of greater surplus. Big topic, of course, is the cost for the project. The structure for the cost is, it is a combined project between the state and the Central Valley Project. The costing is going to be shared proportionate between those two agencies, our agency being 55% of the just the proration of the diversions, and ACWD as a 1% contractor with the State Water Project. That would put us at 0.55% of the assumed total cost for the project. That cost, I'm sure the board is aware, has had a few different numbers floated around. We've been using $20 billion in the business case up till today. The number that's put forth most commonly is $16.7 billion. This is including mitigations and a fair amount of contingency. And given that 45-55 split I mentioned on the last slide, that would put ACWD's share of that at $92 million rounded. Another big topic that the board, I'm sure, is aware of is that the State Water Project does not have an opt-out. When we started this conversation some time ago, we were told that we would have the opportunity to decide whether or not we wanted to participate in the tunnel. Since then, Department of Water Resources, largely from a change from the BDCP approach to Cal Water Fix, has determined that this is simply an upgrade to the project. If you're a member of the project, you're paying for it, prorated to our share of the contract. The CVP does not have that condition in there, so that provides a little bit of volatility, if you will, in a cost-benefit ratio. The CVP opt-out impact is TBD, to be determined. We don't know exactly how many members of the CVP may or may not participate, nor what any response would be. There's an opportunity, presumably, to change the project, to downsize it if there's fewer participants. In order to address this uncertainty, later on we'll see some bill impact analysis that was done by our financial analyst. We put some worst case assumptions in there. We said, what's the worst possible case we could assume right now? We assume 100% of the federal contractors opt out, which is not a very irrational assumption, but it's an extreme assumption. And we also assume that there's no response by changing project size. So we'll see some analysis for that sensitivity in a few slides from now. The project schedule is estimated to take 17 years from authorization. The numbers that we'll be presenting later on the financing are assuming that's completion around 2033, even though that's not exactly 17 years. The request tonight, we have a request from the state and a possible action for the board to take. The state water contractors, as well as the California Department of Water Resources, are requesting that agencies, contract agencies, show support for DWR's approval of California Water Fix to establish the support for the project so that it can begin the next phase, which would include financing and design. That's background on the project. We'll refresh the board as well as the audience on California Water Fix business case that has been prepared to date with the help of a lot of help from Sarah there. There's some information to recall. Mentioned we started in 2016. The values we had been bringing to the board up until now were values that we started with in 2014 when we did the water supply alternative study with RMC. At that time, we just rounded the cost up to $20 billion, so that had ACWD shares $106 million. We also used a yield number of 6.7, and the current estimates that are in the EIR, and actually came out in 2015, so immediately after we began, we've got a more refined number, the 16.7, as well as a higher yield estimate. So where ACWD has been on our water fix business case has been to use the 6.7 thousand acre feet, and if you just bear with me for a moment, that's the difference between what the state currently tells us we should expect moving forward with no project but with no additional regulations, and then that echo scenario, existing condition, high outflow, how bad deliveries could get if nothing's done in the delta. That difference is 6.7 thousand. Now, the modeling they did give us back then showed that, hey, we think with the project, the ability to take advantage of surpluses when they're available, deliveries would be even higher. And so ACWD could very well have approached this whole argument as a potential increase in water supply from our current assumptions, and that would give us a potential yield from the project of 11.2. We're going to work off of the EIR numbers largely because those are the published official numbers. Most of our work has been conservative, assuming lower yields. I'll make reference to the two. I'll try my best to remember to emphasize which ones we're using at the time. But we always make it conservative for the district, that it's a worse argument in favor of an investment, that the risk is eaten in the form of a conservative assumption. Make sure I'm not forgetting anything before I move on. All right. Okay, so the purpose for doing the business case was twofold. One, how do you value a $6.7 billion infrastructure project that has no parallel in the world? You can't exactly go and get a comp. So the first approach was to say, well, how do you value this? He said, well, what would you have to spend to get this kind of water from another project is one way to approach it. And the other part of our business case was to evaluate, are there other benefits from other water supplies that are intrinsic to those water supplies that the district values? So, for example, the district has always put a high priority on having local control, minimizing our dependence on imported supplies. So we have a number of policy objectives that we also like to consider when we evaluate water supply options. A reminder of the scenarios that were evaluated. These started with the water supply initiatives that the board directed staff to look into in 2014 during the drought. Of course, water fix. We had, as a baseline, of course, a no-action option. We looked at indirect potable reuse, and we finalized that study. Excuse me. The study is officially not final. It's still with the state, and as is the $75,000 grant that we've been promised. But all the technical work has been complete for about a year and a half now. We also looked at bay desalination, Los Vaqueros expansion, and since the time, let me step back, since the time of Los Vaqueros expansion, the board has since decided to move in the direction of implementing AMI, I always forget, automated meter infrastructure? Advanced meter infrastructure. And because of the well-established, well, I should say well-established, the well-understood, without a tremendous amount of established conservation benefit that is assumed to go along with AMI, we have introduced some of that because we do anticipate that will help reduce demands moving in the future, thus reducing our reliance on new water supplies. You'll note that I struck out the bay desalination concept. We did that a year and a half ago at this point. The preliminary costs we had from RMC were, as the board may recall, astronomical. It was, I think, $450 to $650 million. It put it completely outside of the realm of reason for us at this time. I'd also like to touch on a few different ways one might evaluate alternative water supplies. We're going to show the conventional unit cost approach. We normally don't like this because it's not nerdy enough. It's pretty simple. What you do is you just take the cost for a concept, you divide into what the yield is from that, how much water, and you get a dollars per acre foot number. I'm going to provide it tonight because that's the reference that's usually used for comparing water supply sources, and we felt that the board should have this additional information. It lacks a lot of consideration of ACWD's operations, our constraints, our facilities, and so it's not a terribly robust approach. It's very much an apples and oranges too when we're looking at different sorts of supplies. If you're looking at a new water supply such as IPR and you need to compare it to a storage concept that allows you to optimize your existing resources, it's kind of hard to say what's the dollars per acre foot. That's why we usually use the integrated resources modeling approach, which the board I think is most familiar with, but for the benefit of the audience tonight, what this does is it gives us a more realistic evaluation of how all of our supplies work together. Intrinsic constraints, problems we may have at times of years in using certain supplies, what our facilities can accommodate. And it allows us more robustness in evaluating the additional policy objectives that the board has set for the planning department, which are, in addition to reliability, really bottom line cost of capital plus the conditional O&M costs, local control, risk, water quality. When we wrap up these numbers from the Cal Water Fix, as the board will see here, this is using the data from the EIS, EIR, so this is the slightly higher yield than we've opted to choose along the way. The official number for ACWD, and I presume the scales to all other parties, is $470 per acre foot. If we were to use the low yield, high cost, obviously the number just scales from there. excuse me, I don't have the comparison here. The AMI being the next most cost-effective option. Excuse me. AMI is the next most cost-effective option from our study, but as you can notice here, the conservation benefit of 2.7 thousand acre-feet is nowhere near the potential loss. That, remember, we're talking about a loss potential of 6.7. Not the 11.2 reflects some actual additional water supply potential. The AMI doesn't provide an alternative, but it is a good comparison point. And as we already know, conservation is by far our most cost-effective next unit of supply. But as we also know with conservation, it's typically not quite enough to make up a real deficit. It just makes a significant contribution in a cost-effective manner. The Los Vaqueros numbers, we recently did some additional modeling with them to try and find out what the highest potential yield is, and we've got a long-term average of maybe up to 9,000 acre-feet per year. It's a lot of reoperation of our system if we were to do that, and one major thing here is that this is a very embryonic project as far as understanding the partnership and how it will operate, where their points of diversion are, having permission to exercise those points of diversion. So there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty in this number. But what I do like is they've approached it from a per unit cost approach. So you see the unit cost of $800 per acre foot pretty much scales to whatever level of participation ACWD may or may not have in that project, because that's taking the full yield potential divided through by the cost, or rather the full cost divided through by the full yield potential, whether that goes to the environmental component, which is Prop 1 funded, or goes to water agencies.
Very briefly, Los Vaqueros. It suggested that we need not buy into the entire project. We could buy into the pipeline, which allows us then to tap into additional water supplies. I would encourage, I don't think the decision tonight's not going to turn on that, but when you do the evaluation for Los Vaqueros, you see if we cannot separate those two. They're not divisible.
Right. Thank you. We'll make sure to look into that. For now, these are the numbers that Contra Costa Water District is using in their NEPA document.
And Thomas, additional question about Los Vaqueros.
Mm-hmm.
The assumed unit cost there is greatly influenced by the level of Prop 1 funding that the project might be able to achieve, right?
So this number is the full cost divided by the full yield.
Mm-hmm.
And if half of that cost goes to Prop 1 funded, or if the full yield is purchased by agencies, it assumes that the full potential of the reservoir is being taken advantage of.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually neutral to whether or not that's being substantially funded through Prop 1 dollars or water agency dollars. They've just put it straight through as a unit cost.
Yeah.
Which actually I like, because it takes out for us the guesswork of making too many assumptions.
Are we allowed questions?
Please, if you have
I think we-
point.
So IPR, so this unit cost is based on the fact that we cannot run the system year-round, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're assuming just run probably, what, half a year? I
Well,
can't quite remember.
Actually, let me step down to it,
Okay.
actually. So, doing your homework, or you remember. The IPR yield, if we recall, this was a 4 MGD facility, would actually produce 4,400 acre-feet a year. And if you notice, the average yield we have here is 2.4 to 4, so it's not able to take advantage of the potential yield. And this is where that integrated resource modeling comes in. What that reflects is the fact that this is, and I'm going to give a nod over here to Sarah again. This is really some excellent work done by Sarah to kind of refer to it as, I think, what do we call it, a realization rate, sort of using an economics term, which is when we're producing it year-round. It's a membrane facility, and USD needs to get the benefit to run it as part of the concept. So it is running year-round, and by putting it into the groundwater basin for recharge, it's kind of taken up some space that we're normally filling up with Alameda Creek diversions. So while we can maybe produce 4,400 acre-feet and put it in, you're kind of precluding diverting an extra 1,000 or 2,000 acre-feet in certain years. And so it eats into that rate. It also results in a lot of saline outflow from the natural gradient underneath the ground. So it's running year-round, but it just doesn't produce that much. It's great in a drought, because it's there when the basin's low and there's not enough local water to recharge the groundwater basin.
And the unit cost is so high just because the realization rate?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I have a quick question as well.
Mhm.
So I was following along with the draft PowerPoint, and I see that Los Vaqueros, the yield in the draft is significantly lower than what you're showing here. So I was curious what kind of changed there.
Sure. So the draft that, I appreciate that. There's probably a few more things you're going to find off. Or remember, that was provisional and draft. The data that we had in there was from some original modeling that we did with Los Vaqueros, where they were, or Contra Costa, where they were making a lot of assumptions of storing our Table A water and also making up dry year supply. So that lower number of about 2,000 acre-feet that's in there, that's kind of representative of their dry year reliability of new water that they could give us. And this one, we went back just yesterday and said, hey, we need water. Run this thing and give us as much of the surplus water when it's available. In order to get numbers like this, we would do sort of extreme operations, such as maybe at certain years only be running off of their surpluses, and our Table A, we would just send that to semi-tropic. We would have to take advantage of the surpluses exclusively when they're available to get a big high number like this. But we asked them to really push the envelope with their modeling to see how much they could potentially generate for us. So it's a very different modeling scenario that they did.
So, just on the water fix, the key on this then is our ability, or the limiting factor is our ability to accept the surplus water, whether we had additional storage, a surface or groundwater storage, and the ability to transport it to make that number work.
We're talking about Los Vaqueros right now. You're speaking specific to water fix?
I thought he was speaking of the water fix on the numbers.
We're talking about Los Vaqueros. Yeah.
But I noticed you used the word up to, because even if there's surplus, it's not guaranteed you'll come to us because they have multiple partners, right?
They don't even have the point of diversion established with the State Water Resource Control Board. So, like I said, everything on that Los Vaqueros line there is very much a concept.
Okay.
Very much a concept.
I'll follow up very quickly then, but both for Los Vaqueros and the water fix. The numbers work much better if we were able to develop mechanisms and storage to be able to transfer the water to us and store it to take that large amounts of surplus water, cheap water, the Article 21 water.
This is outside of Article 21 water, but it's similar that it is grabbing surpluses. So I think when you refer to Article 21 water, this is surplus water that's in the Delta now that's picked up by the state. I don't know how they're going to change that, but my guess is what we currently call Article 21 water, that pile will largely get diminished, and most of it will be called State Water Project Table A delivery. That's basically how the water fix is going to work. Having more storage in the system to capture that surplus water when it's available definitely makes everything work better.
And that's where Del Val or a direct feed to the South Bay Aquatic
or Los Vaqueros.
The quarry pits works.
Yep. No. Any more questions on this slide here? Okay. So for comparison, let me come back. For comparison, water fix, this is the unit cost that's in the EIR, $470. It's assuming that larger 11.2 thousand acre-feet per year delivery that ACWD could take advantage of, which we can't always take. The wettest years, we may find scenarios where we don't have a place to put it. How does that compare to our existing supplies? So we have two imported supplies. Our existing State Water Project supplies it has a big fixed component and a very, very small unit cost for variable delivery cost. In a year, we assume the average delivery, which is 62% of contract, is a volume of 26,000 acre-feet, plus or minus a few hundred. Plus our fixed cost of today, that works out to about $400 an acre-foot. And as with the water fix, that's raw water, so we still have to treat it. And our other imported supply, of course, is San Francisco, which is $1,800 an acre-foot. And the apple and the orange, you've maybe seen me use those in the past. I just always like to point out that San Francisco supply is potable when it comes out of the pipe. It can go straight to customers. It has some intrinsic additional value that we don't get in the raw water from the state, nor that we would get from water fix or Los Vaqueros or IPR, which is just supplementing groundwater recharge. So not too much more expensive than our current state water supplies, and certainly a lot cheaper than San Francisco. When we look at so that's the unit cost approach. When we look at the integrated business case for water fix, I want to just stop and point out a few caveats. As you are very well aware, we've been reviewing this since early in 2016. You know, that's about 18 months. It's a tremendous amount of time for a lot of stuff to change. Even small little incremental change can start to drift off. The results that we're going to put up here are the results the board has seen in previous presentations from the work that was done by our staff over here. The assumptions and numbers have been evolving and changing, so these results are approximate. They're still in the correct zone for what the analysis would be if we spent upwards of a few hundred hours to make those subtle changes and redo all the modeling. We didn't think that was a good use of district resources, so instead we're going to rely on these, but they're still accurate enough for making comparative analyses, comparing one to the next, because they all have the same base assumptions. Reflecting results, costs on modeling results that the board has seen for these scenarios. Just run through this real quick so we understand what we're looking at. This is the integrated resource modeling. So now when we look at, in this approach, we look at capital costs for a new project, the annual amortization cost, and then bottom line average annual production cost. And what we try to capture here, you'll notice there's zeros because in our baseline we're not proposing to build anything. But what we try to capture here is that if we build a new supply, we could build something that's very costly, but it allows us to save a lot of money in our operations. And so the capitalization cost may be largely offset by the annual O&M cost. And that's what this analysis attempts to capture. Our first scenario, of course, is the worst case, and I'll point out that we are including the SED in all of these assumptions. We know very well from recent discussions this week. The substitute environmental document for the San Joaquin River has some pretty draconian implementation assumptions in the data that we've been given. It shows really big impacts in single dry years. We're going to try and look past some of that tonight because there's a tremendous amount of assumptions that still need to be firmed up. Our first scenario, of course, is water fix, and under net capital costs, this is the data we presented previously. That number is $134 million, is a bit bigger. In the time we were assuming the project was $20 billion, and we also assumed that in order to take advantage of the water fix, that we would need to do some surface water enhancements, whether that's a TP2 expanding production capacity or director weed, perhaps taking that water and using it more through the groundwater, or perhaps bringing TB1 back online. So any number of scenarios. So we put a placeholder in there. And we found in this scenario you can see we have a reduced annual operating cost down from baseline of $4 million. So while we would look at $8 million per year financing costs for all this infrastructure, we would actually see about half of that returned to us by reduced operating costs. And that's largely being able to reduce purchases of San Francisco supply in as many years as possible. So we would have more water than we have in the base, or the worst case is the baseline to which these are really compared. The IPR scenario, here's another good example. This has got a much lower net capitalization costs, but the operating cost for that facility, it's power intensive. It would have to run year round. We're replacing free water that's falling from the sky with recycled water to recharge the groundwater basin, so our annual operating cost goes up quite a bit in this scenario. And AMI, this is just for sake of reference, can show some potential, compared to, no, sorry, this is kind of misleading. This still shows a heavy dependence on San Francisco supply due to the SED and the ECHO. We haven't replaced any new supplies. Los Vaqueros, just as a reminder, there's still so much information lacking here. We couldn't actually do this depth of analysis on Los Vaqueros yet.
I suggest that one thing I'd like to see us someday add is the reoperation of Del Valle Reservoir.
Noted. Looking at the other results from our integrated planning approach, we look at the intrinsic value from these different sources, primarily water quality, local control, and resiliency. Resiliency refers to ability to withstand catastrophic loss of a supply, this mostly earthquakes. And you'll note the nomenclature we're using is a naught or a zero means baseline. A plus means it's improved, a minus means it's decreased. And also we have a critical dry year shortage and cost for the project on this graphic. So one stop, the worst case scenario, under an ECHO-SED scenario, we would actually expect water quality to go up because there's going to be a lot more fresh water flowing through the delta, so the water that we're going to get, even though it's a smaller amount, is going to be really nice. It'll be easy to treat, and the T&O issues and all those things will be much better. But we give up some local control because of some implications on our groundwater operations. Stepping through these scenarios, which the board has seen already, we'll just come to focus on the water fix scenario, which shows we anticipate from water fix to have higher water quality. There's great effort is made to isolate the water from the Sacramento River to enhance water quality on deliveries at the South Bay pumping plant. And higher resiliency, it's being built to be earthquake resilient. And then really neutral on the local control. It neither contributes nor detracts. And again, we're going to gloss over the critical year shortage because that's dictated by the SED. But you can see it does improve over an ECHO scenario. So what does that all mean? At the end of the day, we're going to have to pay for the project regardless of how we choose to operate it. So we did receive new new financing information at an agency-specific amortization schedules. Our finance team took a look at that and did some bill impact analysis for the board's consideration. The assumptions that were used in that analysis include a 30-year amortization period of 3.55 interest rate. There are many multiple bond issuances during the process, and I won't even speak to that. The current state water project funding mechanism, which is consistent with our current policies with the usage of property taxes and billing. The bill impacts that you'll see here are evenly distributed between the service and commodity charge and are done for an average residential customer using 1,600 cubic feet per month or per billing cycle. And again, the 55-45 split between the two projects. The analysis conducted by our financial analyst found that with the bond issuance schedule and the front end, the near term is being very low cost, and then the heavier cost coming further out in the future, there's really a gradual ramp up to the peak billing, which is about a 15-year process. The peak bill impact begins in 2033 and then extends for about 15 years after that. And the impact for the average SFR customer is $2.16 per billing cycle, and that's in 2033 dollars. So I don't even know how to de-escalate that in the present day. It's got to be like $1.50 at the most, and that's per billing period. So you can split that, and you want to look at that as a per month. It's just a little over $1 a month in the year 2033, and it's equivalent to a rate increase of about 1.5%. Is that a one-time rate increase?
Right, that would be equivalent to a one-time rate increase of 1.5%. In reality, you'd be looking at like 0.1% over 15 years that adds up to that.
And as mentioned, thank you. And as mentioned previously, we also had a look at the worst case scenario where we said, all right, let's assume that 100% of the CVP customers back out and that we don't resize the project, the current price remains the same, and that escalates or it increases to basically $4 per billing cycle, again in 2033 dollars.
Another way of looking at that is what if they adjust the project scope if they do back out, but then the project is double what the state thinks it is. So the typical over budget huge state project. So we tried to give different ways of looking at this in terms of impact to customer bills. It's about the same that way.
So are there any questions on the bill impact analysis before I move on?
I think one of the options for scaling back the project is to build a single tunnel with two inlets if the ag backs out. So in that case, we're back to the 1.5 to 2%.
Presumably.
Potentially, yes. Mm-hmm. But then if it doubles in cost because it goes over budget, then you're near the high end again.
We're still down to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5%, which is not a huge hit. No, it's not.
I think that's really the
manageable.
takeaway. That I have to say, I was, from bringing these numbers to the board for so long, when we got these financing numbers and put them in the financial model, I have to say, personally, I was surprised at how de minimis they really are. $1 a month in 2033, you could have a huge margin of error, and it's still not a terribly significant cost, given the benefits that the project has to offer. So moving on, conclusions for our business case analysis. The arguments we see in favor of the water fix scenario are that the price of the water fix is considered, frankly, quite reasonable, given the other water supply alternatives. It's not an outlandish cost. In fact, it appears to be our cheapest option right now, with the assumptions that are being used for the environmental documentation. It objectively meets ACWD's policy criterion by enhancing reliability. My goodness. Jackpot. Enhancing our reliability, minimizing rate impacts due to it being our lowest cost option, as well as our enhanced ability to optimize San Francisco purchases. Optimize, I really mean minimize. It enhances water quality. It reduces risks of earthquake as well as climate change. And a big thing here, and this also affects costs and reliability, is it works with our existing system. We don't have to integrate a new supply. We don't have to build a new facility necessarily to work with this project. We may want to do something with our surface water treatment, but it's not a whole new facility. It dovetails with what we do now with a semi-tropic program, with our ability to operate Lake Del Valle. Enough said, we've been building around the State Water Project for 50 years. And finally, it is a fungible asset. It can be sold. There's going to be a market for water in the future. If we participate and we decide down the road that we have more water supply, or perhaps we want to get out of the state, as has been discussed a few times, not get out of the state, but get out of the State Water Project, just to be clear, there are going to be willing buyers for this surplus. People are already asking for it. Arguments against, primarily the uncertainty of the SED. It doesn't address this worst case said, but as I said, and I really caution the board against putting too much weight on the SED modeling at this point. One, it's very preliminary, and two, San Francisco has got a contractual obligation to meet the reliability goals. Either they're going to reoperate or build a new supply. It might have a cost implication, but those shortfall numbers, they have a contractual obligation to avoid. So keep that in mind. Water fix does not reduce our dependence on imported supply, so one of our objectives of maximizing local control is not being optimized with water fix. And it has a fair amount of uncertainties. The final cost, size, and CVP participation, as mentioned here tonight, as not discussed, but the board is well aware there's many legal and other challenges and potential delays in completion of the project. And the big one is that there's no habitat conservation plan associated with the project. The project's going to proceed with an adaptive management plan with the environmental and regulatory agencies, which basically means there's no guarantee on water supply deliveries. So as I have mentioned to the board, we should always consider a future of building water fix but not getting any reliability enhancement. And I still stand by that position, that that is something we need to keep in the back of our minds. The HCP would only come through the BDCP process, the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, and that would basically was never going to go anywhere. It was never going to go anywhere. So the state decided we need to proceed with the project and keep at risk any future environmental regulatory limits.
This is also a legal risk for
challenges.
Opening it up for challenges and at least a 10-year delay, according to Garamendi, in any development, any project timeline.
Potentially. So, in summary, for the arguments presented here this evening, staff recommends that the district support the California Water Fix project in order for us to protect our customers against a catastrophic loss of supply via natural disaster in the Delta, to help prepare us for climate change and sea level rise, to maintain and potentially enhance ACWD's water supply reliability, to improve water quality, and to maintain a reasonably cost-effective water supply portfolio. Prior to this evening, here's a list of State Water Project contractors who have already received authorization from their board to support the project, or their boards have, I'm not sure which connection, the boards have decided to support the project or authorize the general manager perhaps. These are agencies that are backing the project. And I think it's a count of 10 as of tonight, with very significant, at the bottom of the list, Kern County Water Authority or Water Agency went earlier today, and they're practically half of the water supply, the State Water Project demand as it is. So this is a significant list at this point. And so it's staff's recommendation for the staff report. I think, Stephen, have you read the recommendation? Okay. So just to reiterate the recommendation, either adopt a resolution supporting the California Department of Water Resources approval of WaterFix, or authorize the general manager to send a letter of in-conditional support of WaterFix.
Thomas, just a quick question. We're a 1% contributor to the among the state water contractors. Are you saying that Kern County is close to 50% of among the 29?
Stephen, are you?
Kern County Water Agency for Table A, they're 23.5%.
23
for Table A.
And then Metropolitan.
Putting them together with...
Metropolitan is 45.8%.
Okay.
So if
So
you add up
quarter
all
of the
the
project.
agencies, we're well over 70% maximum Table A in support.
Business plan, as I understood, was said that they would meet the business plan if they had a 70% participation, so the Met and Kern are enough to get it through. The rest of us may be along for the ride. That was an earlier comment made, but
Metropolitan, when they took their vote, expressly said that they were going to support the project with $4.3 billion of that 16.7.
There is a financing JPA that has been proposed to sort of advance the money before DWR is able to issue bonds.
Yeah, I
and so
thought
it's
that was-
basically a prepaying of a portion of the project to get the design phase
I thought
going.
that was quite innovative.
let me open this up to the public if anyone wishes to ask a question or make a comment on the water fix. Yes, Mr. Kohler?
Are we doing 3 minutes or?
No.
Good evening, board members, staff. I may be repeating some of the staff's comments tonight, so bear with me. 3 items here that were mentioned by Stephen N. and Thomas. On the biggest 3 items that we're dealing with here is regulations, the Delta smelt and environmental rules we're dealing with, and the Delta reliability. Now, the Delta reliability to me is a dark horse in our how we're looking at this thing. We don't know what's going to happen between future droughts and a seismic event would severely change this water district supply. We dealt with 16 years worth of dealing with the 3 items, believe it or not. And but thanks to the board, we adopted the semi-tropic bank water banking concept back in, I believe it was 2001. I may be wrong with that year. But here's the point: California's economy cannot sustain when the water deliveries that may be reduced or limited for years. It's not going to be a very healthy state, economically speaking. And for that reason, the dual tunnel is needed to make this thing work. But at this point, I want to thank the staff, Stephen Peterson, Ed Stevens, Stephen N., Thomas Iser, and the general manager for all the research that has been done to bring this to tonight's agenda. But I want to go step back a little bit and remind the board that the district and the board and ACWD has led the Bay Area water users to upgrade the San Francisco Hetchy system. ACWD has set a high bar. to be progressive with our Bay Area water supply. Keep that in mind. Now, with that in mind, I am requesting that the directors unanimously vote for the Delta fix. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to address the board on this item or ask questions on the presentation? Please. Is it possible to come up and...
I just wanted to ask for a copy of the presentation.
Oh, copy of the presentation.
Sure. Do we have a paper copy available? It'll be posted on our website within a day or two. Okay.
All right, thank you. Okay, bring it back to the board then for discussion and comment.
Oh boy. So, I think I have made my position fairly clear earlier, is that regardless how we vote tonight, we have to participate because there's no opt-out. So this vote is symbolic. We'll be dragging along kicking and screaming. Or not, or willingly, depends on how the board reacts. We basically have no option. Okay, so that's a little bit irritating. But here's the first question for you. So the cost to ACWD is about what, 92 million, assuming 45-55 split between CVP. You gave an bill impact analysis for having no CVP. So the total cost to ACWD without CVP is about what, $167 million, somewhere give or take, right? That is sufficient. Yeah. That is a significant amount of money.
Absolutely.
So what I really would like to see is when you're comparing different alternatives, also give the high bar, because right now the comparison works out that looks great for the water fix because we're assuming 100% CVP participation for CVP to pick up that 45%. So that is one uncertainty for me. So let me take a first step back, is that I am not questioning the need for Delta fix. None of my comment has to do with the validity of the project or any other project. What I am trying to focus on is this a good investment for our customers at this point? Is this a good way to spend our money? What does it buy us? And all these uncertainties in the assumption definitely has a lot of cost for concern for us. Right? I understand the bill impact is very tiny, but can we spend that tiny amount better somewhere else to give us better reliability? And one of the options we didn't look at in a comparative analysis, as we have discussed before, is direct potable reuse, because then we could actually run the facility 24/7 and use a year-round where the unit cost will actually come down, right? So that's something that's yet another uncertainty for me in terms of cost-benefit analysis and business case analysis, right? And then the regulation uncertainties. We could end up spending all these money, not getting any additional reliability, in fact having a curtail of our deliveries. One thing we could guarantee is we definitely will get better quality water. I think that's something that I'm willing to say that is a benefit. But if you weigh all that together, that is a little bit too much uncertainty for me to commit our customers' money. And we all understood this thing would be tied up in court. My personal feeling is that we will use that time, since we have no option to opt out. We have to participate anyway. We don't have to say, hey, we love it at this point in time. But use this time to look at the other option and see if we could firm our concept up. I was very glad that you actually said this is an asset that's fungible, because if there are more viable and cost-effective options for us, a much more reliable option for us as a district, sell it. Right, and that's a different way to look at things. So I think it's very clear that at this point, I think there's just way too much uncertainty. Credit to staff. You try really, really hard to give me the uncertainties. I know I've been asking a lot of questions and trying to ask you to basically take out a crystal ball. That really wasn't that fair question to ask you guys, and you did a great job. Thank you. But the reality is still not quite enough for me to personally be comfortable to say, yes, at this point in time, this is a great path forward, without having been more certain about the uncertainties. Now then, the question number 2 General Manager asks is, can we have a conditional approval? Right. The conditional approval would be, then this assumption has to be correct, then you have to force CVP to participate at 100% participation rate, that the cost of the project won't go up. I don't think that is a reasonable condition to ask the state.
Actually, embedded in the resolution includes the assumption that the CVP contractors will participate and ACWD is doing a 1% share of the state water project.
Right.
So it actually has included embedded that 0.55% of the total project costs would be our responsibility.
But we also need to ask them not to increase the amount, because if the project went way cost overrun, our cost-benefit analysis will actually swing the other way towards IPR, especially if we look at direct potable reuse. I think it will swing again. So there is nothing, with all the uncertainties, I don't think you could put enough condition to make me say, yeah, we are very comfortable that we should take this risk, especially at a point in time that our support will not make any difference in our participation.
Right, but I do want to make clear that at least the way the resolution is drafted currently, it's conditional based on those assumptions.
Right.
So that is the approach that the other agencies are taking as well. And so it's consistent. It is a conditional support, and it's non-binding if things change, obviously. As you also mentioned, it is somewhat symbolic as well.
It is symbolic.
But what the state and the state water contractors is asking for is really some level of commitment so that the project can move forward, or at least support, political support, however you want to call it. But that's what you're looking at this evening.
The project will move forward either way.
And
we will participate either way because we have no option.
Yeah, and we as staff have always assumed that when this time comes, and we are here, I think I even mentioned that we are going to do the best that we can to provide as much information as we can when we're asking the board to make a decision. But still warn that some of you may find what we provide is not, I won't say not satisfactory, but not terribly comfortable. And that's what I'm hearing now.
Yes, and I totally agree with that. I just want to make it really clear. I appreciate the amount of information staff has provided, the amount of work that all of you have done. But that is still insufficient for me personally to get me past that comfort level to say this is the option for us at this point in time, because there are just way too many wild cards out there. If you're willing in the conditional approval saying that, and the project shall not spend over our share is no more than 92 million, then maybe we could talk.
And that is something, should the board want to make that a condition, I think we can do.
And the assumption is no decrease in water supply and all that.
Then I encourage you to look at the resolution itself and the wording and see if there's any change or modification that you feel, because on the dollar amounts, I think they're included. If there's other issues, that would be we could go into discussion on that.
The resolution. Okay, I will take a look again. I actually did take a look quickly, but I might miss something.
So I did have a couple directed questions. Should we take those as comments for later? And
well, please, if you wish, why don't you, the questions, state the question you think you have and the response, please.
So we had, Director Huang, just to be responsive, the one comment about DPR, remind that DPR is still not regulated or permissible, and so it is kind of a future technology assumption, whereas WaterFix is here today. So that's part of why it hasn't been part of our trade-off, is not the proverbial bird in hand, but the bush is also further in the future.
I guess I have a slightly different point of view, because the WaterFix will not be built for a long time.
It won't. But the other expression to apply to WaterFix is the expression of when's the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. That's sort of the situation with WaterFix. With climate change and sea level rise, And I just want to reiterate the one point I made earlier, and maybe I didn't emphasize it enough, is it's my opinion as a water supply and planning manager that the resiliency element is enough reason to fund this project, even with no enhancement in water supply reliability. The scenario of losing the delta for up to 5 years is a very costly alternative to not seismically enhancing the delta. We did an analysis on this in 2011, and we found the potential customer impacts in our community could exceed the cost of the actual water fix itself. So there is a substantial cost trade-off just for the seismic reliability element of this project alone, and I personally believe it has enough merit at the cost assumption.
I think we will have to have a disagreement. We're going to go back to direct potable reuse because in the seismic event, that would definitely a much more assured supply. I understand it's not a bird in hand and the regulation is just changing, but I guess what I was trying to allude to is we have to participate in the project anyway. It will take so long to actually go towards construction. In the meantime, I think we're obligated to look at direct potable reuse to see at some point when it becomes fruition and when the regulation is there, how it would impact us in terms of a secure local supply and cost versus participating in the water fix as it is right now. My guess would be the cost will keep on going up just from the lawsuits and the delays.
Good point. The board, when we did IPR study, will point out, though, that a recycled water-based source of supply, we deemed that in the study to be low seismic resilience because of the source for recycled water supply is coming from seismically unreinforced sanitation sewers. And actually in that report we concluded that the supply would be offline under a local earthquake scenario as well. So unfortunately the recycled water options don't fare terribly well.
Okay.
Not to be argumentative, but that was a conclusion from our report.
Okay.
And just to add one other point, as the board's aware, we just went through strategic planning. You, I'm sure, recall the beautiful visual that had the road with the fog and the delta and the possible other projects that the district could implement.
Mm-hmm.
So just to be totally clear for the benefit of the whole board, what we're talking about here is moving forward on the road that is getting us closer to the California water fix, but there'll be other opportunities to get off that road as well. And so that's what we're talking about.
Right.
It's that just moving us along.
That's why I asked for a checkpoint yesterday.
Right.
But to answer your question, the problem with the water fix itself will make sure there's water in the tunnel. The problem is after earthquake for the water fix is that South Bay Aqueduct might not be seismically as strengthened. So
Correct.
Even if water could get to banks, it cannot get to us. And it will take a significant amount of time to rebuild the aqueduct.
This is correct.
I would speculate that it will be faster for us to fix our infrastructure to get recycled water online versus getting South Bay Aqueduct fixed. The point is not trying to debate with you. The point is to say that there are so much uncertainty out there. Some benefit that's highlighted might not be an actual benefit just because all these uncertainties like South Bay Aqueduct, availability. So there are a lot of things out there that is not making me comfortable. And yes, thank you, Director Wee. I just finished reading a resolution. Apparently, I missed the very last sentence of the resolution. So thank you for pointing that out.
Thank you. Director Gunther?
Well, I think this is 20 years too late. We've been talking about the Delta fix in various forms for years. And we keep talking. And people keep suing and say they're going to sue. This was the missing piece of the puzzle when the stupid puzzle was built. This part was missing. And we have a system that was never completed. Now, I agree that direct potable use has potential. But there are a lot of variables associated with that. There's a lot of costs that are associated with that. There's a lot of, I think, hidden costs that are associated with that. And that's a different, I don't see that affecting our decision tonight. It certainly doesn't affect my thoughts. I've been supportive of this for a long time. I think we got to support fixing the system. The arguments opposing this, I hate to use the term don't hold water, but I think they don't. Concept of sending more water south is not an accurate statement, in my opinion. We had a judge shut the pumps off a few years ago. A judge just shut the pumps off for, different reason, but that's how easy it is to shut these pumps off. The Wanger decision, that's how simple it is to stop this system. And that makes our lives miserable. How do you plan for that? How do you plan for this? There's so many different assumptions we have to deal with. We don't even know what the environmental movement's going to do with it. We got another 20 years before we get it built. 17, probably more. We can't build a fish ladder in 20 years. I'm not surprised this is going to take that long. I fully support it. I think we have to get behind it. I've supported it for a long time. I don't like the concept of being told we have to support it. I support it because I want to support it. I think it's the piece we need. Sure, I would love to see these variables come in, but they're there. We have to acknowledge the fact they're there and move on and accept it and say, okay, let's go. Odds are in 17 years, there's a good chance I won't be sitting on here. I might. How old I'll be. But, we've been talking about this since I've been up here, and that's over 20 years now. So I've been talking about this for 20 years already. And we're finally at a point where we're going to say, yeah, we support fixing it with something, a plan. And that's what I think we need. After we do this, we got another fight against us, because I almost guarantee you're going to see something on the ballot. The anti-fix is going to push hard to get the North State to say no. And that includes our own constituencies, right here. And they're going to look at every bit of uncertainty they got to say we shouldn't do this. And by saying that, we're not getting anything done. This is an opportunity to progress at least to a point where maybe we could see something get done. But we've been talking about it for 20 years. It's time to stop talking and move forward. And it angers me that we have people in the Delta saying they're going to sue us and it's going to hold this up for 10 years. I have personal views on why they're doing that. And it doesn't have anything to do with water. Now, there is some issue there that they may have their water supplies affected. But I don't see them stepping up either to help out with the problem. And I just see that it's interesting we have to do it, or a state saying we have to do it. Like I said, I don't even agree with that. I think we should just do this. It's the right thing to do. Fix the system, make it work. What comes up with sea level change or, climate change, it may blow this whole thing up. It may blow everything up that we do. But with the information we have today, this is the best plan. Actually, I'm very surprised by how low the cost per bill will be. I expected it to be much, much higher. I was expecting at least $100 increase per bill. trying to figure out how do I sell that to the customers. But at the cost it is, I just see it, I fully support it. Sorry.
Actually, no, it's good to have different opinions. Actually, that brings out a question, if I may. So the increase per bill is the total project cost? Does that include a component that, or are we shifting part of that cost to property tax bill?
It's the existing policy for property tax and...
Right, so there's a split. So
mentioned,
the increase
yeah.
is actually bigger, so there will be another increase in the customer's property tax bill. Right, okay, so...
It's subject to an objection by Jarvis Gann, which is arguing that they can't do, that has to be on the bill. So that'll be one of the legal uncertainties we're running into.
I guess the clarification I'm trying to make is the impact to the customer as a whole is actually bigger than just the $2 per bill cycle, because there's another component that's not on the graph, which is the property tax component that our customer has to pay anyway.
But approximately what's that amount?
Well, the dollar
Certainly
amount
not
there is
$100.
how is it going to be billed?
Yeah,
to the
definitely
customer?
not $100, so...
Right, so under current policy, we recover 67.7% of our fixed state water project cost through the property tax.
Okay,
We applied that same percentage here.
okay.
So using rough terms, we would recover about 1/3 of the cost on the bill. That's the $2.16 per billing cycle, and approximately 2/3 of the cost on the property tax, or then about $4.32 per billing cycle on the property tax.
We'll have an opportunity to talk about that in committee, but I would...
So
$24.
$25 a year
entirety of
property
the net
tax in
delta could go on the
$20, $33.
property tax. That's all.
Right,
Okay.
so the total amount, you're looking at a little over $6 per billing cycle between the bill and property tax, or a little over $3 per month.
Thank you. I just wanted to make it clear on the record that what is the total cost to our customers, not just on the bill. That's it.
Thank you. Mr. Aziz? Akbari, Mr. Akbari.
So I think I think Director Gunther kind of alluded to this has been a topic of conversation longer than I've been alive. So so you
and me both.
Right. I have a few more clarification questions.
Mm-hmm.
So just to confirm, we're not expecting an increase in our water supply, correct?
We do not assume that. The official numbers that are in the EIS and EIR, the environmental documentation, do reflect higher deliveries. We did not take on that assumption because we're trying to be conservative.
Okay. Now, looking at the timeline, I mean, just going off the timeline as it stands right now, started last year. What do you actually think it will be the timeline for project completion? Because it doesn't seem like it'll be 2033.
So the schedule reflected was 17 years, so I was trying to allude to that. It sort of suggests more like 2035 if we were able to start up next year. And then one can just infer for every year of delay that would slide. Although I understand some of the process would continue even if there are certain delays, so it's not that linear. I believe some of the challenges anticipated would allow that 17-year process to actually commence, so design phases and things like that would be proceeding.
Yeah, because it seemed like the first 5 years or so were staffing and design, so I wouldn't expect that to be delayed by litigation.
Yeah. Stephen, anything to add to that?
Just like you were saying, Thomas, is that a lot of these things are being discussed now, and DWR itself is trying to formulate the plan going forward. So until they're getting all the input from the contractors, they're really not saying too much in terms of actual start dates. But one can assume as soon as all the green lights are there, they're ready to take off.
Okay. And can you review for me just one more time the environmental impacts of not going forward with the water fix and going forward with the water fix?
So I didn't hit too much on the depth of the environmental debate because, frankly, I can't even speak that far to it. The major environmental concerns right now are that by heavy pumping in the South Delta, we are entraining fish into the South Delta that want to be somewhere else. And we have heavy restrictions on our operations because they're different life cycles and times of year. Those pumping impacts can be greater. So the two notable species are the Delta smelt, which are called a pelagic fish. They free float with the water. If the water goes this way, they go that way. And if the water goes that way towards the pumps, they wind up going to the pumps, and that's not a suitable habitat for them. So that's a big problem we have now. The other one is the salmonid migration, particularly the smolts. So the adults come in and they go up to their spawning habitat, and assuming they survive and find what little habitat there is left, and produce smolts, then the smolts are on their way out. They too get distracted off their course and brought towards the South Delta where the pumps are. They're usually pretty good swimmers and can ultimately find their weight for the most part, but they're substantially delayed and they're exposed to a lot of hazards in the way. So we pull these migratory fish off of their course, cause delays that causes harm to the species. So that's the current operation. I guess this would help. That's that scenario there. And by putting the diversion point, sometimes it's helpful not to even think of there being a tunnel. Rather than diverting water from here, we'd be just diverting a substantial amount of the water up here. Not all of it. These pumps will still be working, and they'll still see the same restrictions based on the fish species that are in the zones and how flows in the delta are moving that we see today. But by taking the larger amounts of freshwater flows from the North Delta here, we prevent a lot of this flow direction that misleads fish or draws them into these more dangerous zones for them. So we're just substantially reducing that operation, which is so harmful, through the process. And then the last element is that down here, the state water projects have 0 fish screens, and it cannot be retrofit to include fish screens. There's not enough real estate out there. The Central Valley project has a collection facility that basically, when the fish come into them, I keep saying scooped up. I don't want to use that term. They're collected and they're relocated to other areas in the delta. These processes are very harmful to the fish. The survival rates are very low. So it's a very impactful process on any fish that make it into this collection facility. The screens that will be up here for where a substantial amount of the diversions would now come from, they're on the Sacramento River, and they are designed just like our fish screens out here, where you have a very controlled ratio of how much water can be approaching those screens compared to the water that sweeps past, such that even the smallest, they're fry friendly, so the fry are the smallest of your salmonid life cycle, just the little hatchlings. Even just flowing with the river, they would sooner flow past the screen than be impinged on the screen. So those are the two major benefits. And then finally, just by having 2 diversion points, even if it's not how we plan to use it now, and that's the point of the sort of adaptive management plan, by having 2 different points of diversion, maybe there is an impact up on the Sacramento River at certain times of year identified down the road. We can still operate at the southern end, and then when there aren't impacts there, we can take larger amounts of water up there when there's lower environmental impacts. So we've got 2 places to sort of divert from now instead of just 1. So those are, in a nutshell, those are the sort of 3 major arguments for what the problem is now and how this project will, it's not a solution, but it alleviates substantially the current problems that we're having. And then I'd point out one big argument with the title Water Fix is it's an aspirational title. I think most people will acknowledge there's still going to be a lot of problems moving forward. This is just going to give us a much more powerful tool to continue to operate in the Delta.
Okay.
Thank you. Any?
Oh, and I didn't even show up anywhere in here, but Eco Restore is the mitigation component of the project. I don't have the details offhand, but there's a tremendous amount of habitat investment and restoration that is going to be funded in that $16.7 billion that goes into mitigations to improve habitat, amongst other things, for the benefit of endangered species.
Actually, one more question. So when the Twin Tunnels project was being evaluated, there were dozens of other projects, right? There were like 100 projects that were being evaluated at once. Did ACWD at any point offer any thoughts or suggestions on any of those? Did we have another project that we felt was better? What was our initial reaction to the Twin Tunnels project?
The representative who was there for most of those earlier discussions is not here tonight. But to my knowledge, ACWD was never as involved in any analytics, any of the discussions or reviews of technical documents to actually propose project alternatives.
We did look at some proposals for a renewed peripheral canal. There were a couple of different options.
The original peripheral canal. Those were some of the 100 alternatives that were originally floated. Yeah. But to the extent that we commented on any of them, I'm highly doubtful that we really provide anything of any substance.
Well, I'll keep my comments relatively short, but generally I am supportive of the resolution. I think the big tasks for me as a director are ensuring our water supply, and I think this does go towards that, and to plan for the future. And I think this is a key component to that. It's 40% of our water supply. At some point we also don't really have a choice. We have to be part of it, whether we want to or not. But I think it is, as Director Gunther was saying, it is a step that we need to take, and it's a step that we're taking a little bit too late, in my opinion. But I think it's now or never, so we definitely need to get on board. So I'll leave it with that.
Thomas, could you address a subject here before I get into my comments, which is, and I'm trying to extrapolate from what Director Akbari brought up here. Mm-hmm. Some will argue that there are environmental ecosystem benefits with California Water Fix. Mm-hmm. So, where are all the potential lawsuits coming from? It's from people that feel that they're not getting enough out of the California Water Fix. That's primarily where we're going to get lawsuits from, isn't that true? And so my question is, what are they fighting for that they see as are environmental detriments to the Delta?
So it's a great question, and I don't want to speak for the entire environmental community. I did speak with a few. I won't mention names, but one who was behind a filed lawsuit. And the largest complaint that twofold. One, the two key arguments that I got from this person who was behind one of the lawsuits, three of the lawsuits actually, three separate lawsuits, that a disagreement that there's surplus flows on the Sacramento River, ever, and second, that there are just insufficient restraints with this extra diversion point to limit net diversions out of the Delta. So basically the assumption is you put in a 9,000 CFS diversion point, you're going to make no changes in the south, and you're going to pull this extra 9,000 off of the north of the Delta. And I just respectfully disagree with both of those positions. There's been a tremendous amount of environmental flow provided for the Sacramento River that's been designated for rediversion downstream. That's what Sites Reservoir is for. That's what the Yuba Accord is for. We just went through a winter that had a little bit of extra water on the Sacramento River, and I don't think many people would complain if some of that was diverted for water supply at the expense of reduced diversions during more sensitive times of year. I think everybody knows what I'm saying here. I mean, we had a tremendously wet winter. To argue that it wouldn't have been environmental enhancement to take surpluses at a time like what we just went through, to sacrifice other times, I think is hard to support. And then finally, with regard to net diversions out of the Delta, there's water rights permits. I mean, we only have the authorization to take so much water out of the Delta collectively between the two projects. There are all sorts of flow requirements. There's the X2 line, the salinity line in the Delta, the OMR restraints, which control how much flow can travel south. This is to limit how much south pumping whenever it says, look, you're moving too many fish south. Those constraints are still in effect. It is a dual conveyance facility. It's not just the tunnels. The tunnels alone can't run the project. So those are the two most significant arguments I heard personally. The rest, what I have read, about. My staff actually looked up a fair amount of arguments I think fit into a bunch of, frankly, less biting environmental concerns than the assertion that there's not enough flow, and also that there are no limits on the diversions.
Thomas, wasn't one of the proposals that was not accepted was basically armoring the levees?
Mm-hmm.
And this is now just my opinion, but that helps the in-Delta communities fix their problem. If we build this, that need isn't there. Now, I'm not saying that that's why they're not supporting this. But I remember back when that was being talked about, was one of the projects, one of the concepts was being driven very hard, was we'll just armor the Delta as it is today, and we're going to fix the levee so this earthquake isn't going to happen.
Well, the earthquake will happen.
Well, the earthquake will happen, yeah, but the levees aren't going to collapse. But you see, if we build this, the levees don't get fixed. Where the need for the levees, we're now out of that equation. The water people aren't there anymore. Like I said, there's no proof, but I find it interesting.
Levee improvements are still going to occur. They're still going to be essential. And I'd like to point out that no matter what you do to armor those levees, this is still going to happen. And that's kind of the downfall of, as far as being purely from a water supply perspective, if we were just being completely forgetting the co-equal goals, looking at just water supply, forget everything else, the tunnels don't get you there, because the tunnels can't be enough to sustain the current State Water Project at full operation. We still need the levee system, and that will happen, and the cost associated with that will still be borne by FEMA and the state and landholders and insurance companies and us in the repair of the Delta and restoration for the through Delta component of the system. So this is, and Director Sethy, I had one more response for you for the environmental community, but this speaks to the same point, which is there is an adaptive management plan. The regulatory agencies have agreed to monitor and change operations as the environmental impacts are identified. And that topic plus this right here speaks to this being a true compromise. Nobody's happy. The water community is not happy that they don't have enough environmental protection from further regulations. The environmental community thinks that the water agencies are going to suck the Delta dry. Those two positions are still largely held, and as we all know, that's the classic sign of a good compromise is everybody got something, but nobody's happy, and it remains the same for the Delta land interest as well.
And if I may add to the lawsuit exposure, the in-Delta agricultural community is also very concerned because they feel that as a result of the twin tunnels, salinity in the Delta may increase. Right now they enjoy simply hanging a pump over the levee to be able to irrigate their fields, and that may impact them and that lifestyle. Mm-hmm. If that becomes a big issue for them. Contra Costa Water District was also concerned about that issue, and hence they reached a settlement agreement with DWR relatively early in the process, which I think was a good move for Contra Costa Water District. Mm-hmm. So in Delta agricultural community is also sort of they're part of the not happy club that we're all in. Not 100% happy.
Thank you.
Did we sufficiently answer your question?
Yeah, no, I was trying to raise the question so that we all understand what's going on here. And there is this intense battle going on in the Delta. All you have to do is drive around, you see all the signs, from north of Sacramento to the northern Delta, all the way down to southern part of the Delta. So I agree with you. So I've been 100% behind the California water fix since day one. I believe that this is one of Governor Brown's signature accomplishments during his 2 terms in office. And I haven't really wavered in my opinion. I think, just like you said, compromise is required at the end of the day. And we've been fighting on this for decades. I believe that this is about the best compromise that can be achieved at this time. That doesn't mean that we won't see further efforts to improve the Delta ecosystem down the road through future water bonds. I think that's where it's going to come from. For our community, what I'd like to point out is that, hold on here, of the 29 state water contractors, we were the first water contractor to sign a deal in 1962. We helped pay for the state water project system that goes from Oroville all the way down to Southern California. And we were investors in our community in the building of Oroville Dam as well. So that agreement that was put in place in 1962 and largely crafted by Matt Whitfield, former general manager here, and Morris Hyman, the attorney and also founder of Fremont Bank, and Gene Rhodes, who was one of the founding fathers of the city and sat on the city council and was a longtime mayor and law partner with Morris Hyman. These were the architects behind bringing new water supply into our Tri-City area when our groundwater system was severely depleted and also had very high salinity as a result of water coming in from the bay and overdrafting of that groundwater system. So what our attachment to the state water project did for this community was it transformed it. We had no extra water in terms of providing for development, for commerce, for anything. That became the lifeblood of this community, was bringing in that new supply.
Allowed us to restore the groundwater basin.
Right, and when we signed the deal with San Francisco in 1964 for Hetch Hetchy supply, that gave us another supplementary buffer here in the community. It also allowed us to reinvigorate our Niles Cone aquifer. It was we couldn't have done it without a Delta water supply and some imported water. One thing that Director Kohler brought up here was our investment in water banking, and we have invested our ratepayers' money in a wonderful water banking program. We have close to a 4-year supply now, banked away, and as Thomas was pointing out, we would be severely limited in our ability to transfer water back. Remember, it's coming, we're doing trade-offs and transfers from down south. So I think we would be putting our investment severely at risk if we do not participate in construction of at least one tunnel. Got to get one through there. As I remind people in the community, and it's a very hard concept to maybe buy into, but anything, because people say, oh, all the water is being shipped from Northern California down to Southern California. Well, anything south of the Delta is part of Southern California when you look at a water map. And we're part of Southern California. The Tri-Valley area, Tri-City area, Santa Clara County, we're all part of Southern California. when it comes to a water map, water distribution. And so if you look at water efficiency in the state, the population of Los Angeles has grown dramatically, Southern California, since 1980, but the consumption per capita has not risen. That means that Southern California has been implementing a lot of very smart water usage concepts into their communities. And I don't want to call them retards, but the communities that have not been as progressive are more closer to Central and Northern California, Sierra communities, things like that, Sacramento itself. So I just want to reinforce that concept that we're part of that Southern California water distribution plan. Director Huang brought up some good points about what is the real cost of participating in this system. And I have some perspectives that really come out of the Finance Committee, where we've talked about this with our Finance Director, GM. And in my mind, there's some benefits here that may not come to the forefront easily. One is that our costs on the California Water Fix are going to be amortized over a much longer period of time than would be, let's say, a revenue bond to finance
PR.
Right, IPR or any other project in the community, right? So and I looked at what Metropolitan was doing with their board vote, and they're estimating an amortized period of 45 years. Well, that really brings down the cost when you're amortizing it over that period of time, especially at a low interest rate environment right now. And I like the idea, we may disagree on this, Director Huang, but I do like the concept of the long amortized period with 2/3 of that going on to the property tax. That's where I think it really belongs. It's infrastructure. It creates value in people's homes, their businesses, industry in the area. So to the extent that we can put more of the costs of any project in this district onto the property tax bill, I'm in favor of it. If we do an IPR facility, like a 4MGD facility or something, it's really going to be borne on the commodity side, on people's bills. So just something to think about.
Okay. I'm trying to think if we can get to the comments and a vote, or if we want to take a break in the interim. Do we have a request for a break?
I'm just checking if the board's hanging in there so far. You've been working hard for a couple of hours.
Well, then we'll see if we can wrap this up and get to a vote. We'll hope to take a break.
Could I make
Oh, please, go ahead.
The last point I wanted to address from Director Huang is that if we vote in favor of supporting the California Water Fix, in my mind, it does not preclude looking at any other water supply initiatives, any other projects. It's not an either or. This is a primary backbone for this community. If we come up with a better plan on something, I definitely have an open mind. And if it came to selling our water rights on the State Water Project in order to fund an internal local project, that may be something that we should consider. But my decision is not necessarily based on the current cost figures that are out right now, 16.7. I honestly believe this is going to be a $40-50 billion project, at least. And I say this having followed so many projects here in the state of California. When the '89 earthquake happened, I think a lot of us may remember, they were saying $6 to $9 billion to build a new Bay Bridge, right? by the time they actually got it completed, 25 years later, and more than 5 years or 20 years beyond their original scope, it was closer to like $100 billion that we're spending on a bridge, right? Something
There's a lot.
staggering. So, my decision is not really based on what the current cost estimate is. I do believe it's going to be a lot bigger. I read through a few months back a very interesting history of the channel and how that project was accomplished, what the costs were, manpower that was required, and it's really the only comparable project we can look at. And it's fascinating to see a lot of the parallels in how hard it was to come to a decision, the engineering, the lawsuits, the fights, and the financing, and finally getting it all done. And it was a real challenge, and we're going to be essentially building a channel under the delta. So if the cost were to turn out, at the end of the day, for our customers in the 20, 30, 40, 50 period, to be even $10 per bill, I'm in favor of it. So those are my final comments.
Thank you, and try and keep mine short, then we can get to a vote. The resolution tonight is fairly simple, very short and brief. It talks about our committing $92 million toward a $16.7 billion project. There's a lot of other issues. In comparison, no additional water under the current concept. In comparison, we are committing $240 million, or committed to pay $240 million to the Hetch Hetchy retrofit. No additional capacity. The unit cost is about 6 times more. Politically, this board supported the Perfield Canal, 15,000 cubic feet per second. It got voted down by local voters by 80%. The tunnels will each have 4,500 CFS, and I suspect in the end, when it all breaks down, we may get one, and it may not be until 2040 time frame. The funding mechanisms of using the state system, I think, is suspect because there'll be an item again on the ballot that will probably vote it down. So we'll have to reach into our own pocket to pay for this effort along with it. I think the Met understands that as well. So the total dollar amounts are such that they're manageable. We're talking, whether it be single digits per bill. So I can, on that aspect, fine. This is not a fix. It's not a solution. This is getting us through a near-term crisis. The delta is, as a surface water conveyance mechanism, is doomed. Sea level rise, the loss of natural losses of the tracks. It's going to be an inland salton sea. The Corps of Engineers made that declaration back in the 1990s. It hasn't changed. So we have to find a way to get water past the delta, and it's probably going to come out of our height. At this point, I think this number is going to grow, but eventually we're going to have to pay the bill. One advantage of a tunnel is that it'll allow us to get water transfers. That we'll be able to expand the presentation you had, and that there will be water that will be available for sale at up to 100 times more than the farmers are paying for. They can be delivered to our district. And those economics are going to finally come into play. So in the big picture, yeah, I can support this. I do have a concern that there are other issues which we've not addressed as a district or along with our fellow districts, and that is the vulnerability of the system in the South Bay Aqueduct. Yep. And we've lost the opportunities, near-term opportunity, but it's still there, to reoperate the Del Val Reservoir, which will give us another significant benefits. But I would hope the South Bay contractors would gather together and go to the state and say, If you're going to go with a big project for the state, let's expand the concept of the California Water Fix to include the retrofit of the South Bay Aqueduct, which is at the end of its service life. And you can have all the water at Byron Bethany, but if you can't get it to us, we got a problem. The other pipeline that's going to be coming in is Los Vaqueros, an 8-foot diameter line from the transfer station below the dam to Byron Bethany. Ties into East Bay Mud and other water supplies and allows you seasonal deliveries because it still will be a seasonal year. It will not be a 12-month reliable water supply. So the more we can work on secure delivery systems, we'll find the water, and it will probably be other water sources. This district does not have a water problem. We saw that in our last strategic plan. 15 years of supply being augmented by the water we have currently banked at semi-trophic, not counting the other supply sources that are available. We have no water shortage in we don't need recycled water as a water supply mechanism. We don't even need conservation. We've got water. So it's not a development constraint. Fortunately, this district politically has not gone down that route, so we're okay there. So I'm supporting the motion that's coming up tonight and would hope I could get encouragement on the part of the other board members for our district to approach and see if we can get concurrence from the South Bay contractors to get the state to take an interest in the South Bay Aqueduct and the reoperation of Del Valle. I think everyone in our board and staff are in agreement there should be some level of reoperation of Del Valle. The question is how much and how much political grief we want to take in that effort. But that to me is a bigger issue, a far more critical issue. So with that, do we have...
Actually, can I make a clarification comment? So based on other directors' comments after mine, obviously I did not make it really clear of my thoughts. My opposition is not to the water fix. It is not a comment on the environmental impact or benefit of the water fix, of having the additional screen and different intake. My focus and my concern is solely focused on, is this a cost-effective option for this water district and for our customers? There are definitely benefits to the water fix. I get that. I also do not challenge, and I actually agree that we needed the state water project way back when. The concern is that now at this point in time, we have a lot more other options in terms of the uncertainty, in terms of the fact that the state water project itself, beside the water fix, will require a large dollar infusion for its O&M. The system needs a lot of maintenance. At this point in time, we have other options. Once again, is it cost effective for us to go through this step? Granted, this is a symbolic gesture. This is a totally symbolic vote. We're not going to change the outcome. But this is a personal choice for me. Why do I want to commit myself to make this symbolic gesture that's not going to make any differences to the overall outcome when I know I cannot be assured that it's the right decision for this district and for our customers? So that really is the objection. It is not speak to the fact that I don't agree with the environmental impact or the additional water reliability. That's given, and I understand that. That project has benefit. But look at it from our point of view. We are a very lucky district. We have other water supply options. And there are new ones that's potentially coming online that we should take a look at. And I do appreciate, Director Sethy, that you acknowledge that taking a positive vote today does not mean we preclude looking at other alternatives. And I agree with that. And that's why I alluded to that this project is going to take so long to take off that we will have time to look at other options. And I agree with that. But I guess for me, it's a personal philosophy that if I cannot be happy and be assured that my customers' benefit will be protected, then why am I making this symbolic vote that's not making any differences? So I think we'll just make it really clear, I actually agree with a lot of your comments.
All right.
How about if I try to put forward a motion with some help here?
Do we have the staff recommendation? And the staff resolution?
My recommendation would be to support the staff resolution, choice number 1, and ask that the general manager be instructed to do as you said, Director Weed, to have the South Bay contractors have some input to DWR on the work that's necessary to, how should I put it, refurbish the South Bay Aqueduct. Is that concise enough, or do you need more?
So, option 1 is written as adopt a resolution supporting the California Department of Water Resources approval of California Water Fix. So
As is.
So the board could act on that. And then secondly, I'm hearing a request to direct the general manager to begin working with the other South Bay Aqueduct water contractors to approach the Department of Water Resources and stress the importance of maintaining the South Bay Aqueduct for our own water supply reliability, as well as to encourage, if I'm just going with Director Weed's request, to encourage dialogue about the reoperation of Lake Del Valle to continue.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So,
for
the motion then is adopt the resolution, as I mentioned, and then the board, if you so choose, you don't have to make a motion on the second part. You can just tell me what you want me to do.
Okay.
So why don't I simplify the recommendation here just to support the staff recommendation on the resolution as is, and we take a vote on that, and then we'll have a little bit further discussion.
So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Roll call, please.
Director Sethy?
Aye.
Akbari?
Aye.
Gunther?
Aye.
Huang?
No.
Weed?
Aye. Now, on the second portion, do the board members support, is there any comment on the board request to the district, to the general manager to engage the South Bay contractors to formulate a presentation to DWR and concerns on the condition of the South Bay Aqueduct and the reoperation of Del Valle?
I totally support that.
Does that require a vote?
No, it doesn't.
No, right, it says
I
a
need
request.
a concurrence from the members of the board.
So we're
if they're-
moving the director's request? Okay.
Well, is there general concurrence on that item?
Yes.
Mr. Akbari? Mr. Gunther?
I'm only concurring with half of it.
You are?
I'm not particularly, I think we should leave the Lake Del Valle portion of it out of it. I am okay with discussions about the South Bay Aqueduct, although I think we're going to have to end up paying for that ourselves based on all other philosophy with the State Water Project, even though it goes against everything else. And I'm not ready to say we want to approach them about the Lake Del Valle at this point.
If I could, on the Lake Del Valle, point out that I left it as broad as I could.
Yep.
That you would also incorporate the suggestions that that have been proposed by staff to look at lowering the intake for the small treatment plant that would not that would be compatible with not relocating East Bay Regional Park District totally out of the park.
I think if you leave the request with work reoperating Lake Del Valle really general, I could live with it. Because obviously, we do respect, Director. We both have very different concepts as to what reoperating Lake Del Valle should be.
Exactly, but in the
but
broader
if you
context,
leave
I think
it
we all
in a
agree it
very
should be.
general sense, yes, we could talk about it. Because my concept is just reoperating instead of moving facility and reoperating it based on better weather forecasting and better water storage and release. I could live with that. But if we're talking about major moving infrastructure and keep kicking East Bay Regional Park out, that's a no-go for me.
Well, if I might just add one plug here, Director Gunther. We, Director Weed and myself and our Assemblyman, Kansan Chu, went up to Lake Del Valle. We had 3 representatives from DWR that came down, left at 6 in the morning to meet us up there. And I'm not trying to say that we know where they would go on something like this, but I felt like we had a receptive ear. They were eager to learn, and they recognized that the 50-year contract that they have with East Bay Regional Parks District is going to be coming to an end. You know.
No, I don't disagree with you at all. I just don't think we have the political power to achieve that. I think the Park District will just say no, and I don't see us having the political power to overcome that. If we could figure out a way to do it, but to say you're going to just get rid of Lake Del Valle, East Bay Regional Park, or you're going to basically destroy most of the facilities, I just don't see that happening.
That is not the statement of the motion. It's to start negotiations. The land is owned by Department of Water Resources. They built a reservoir that they've never utilized for their own purposes, and we have enough water rights ourselves to take advantage of far more by merely lowering the intake to a small package treatment plant that they have. That would be a modest cost. That is an extraordinary, from a dollar per acre foot standpoint, it's our cheapest alternative. The infrastructure is already there. It takes a minimal amount of money to do that and relocate a boat ramp. You can get far more benefit, of course, if we relocated the park to the 5,000 acres adjacent to the reservoir that Zone 7 purchased for the purpose of relocating the park. Still giving them park and recreational facilities.
I don't disagree with...
But those are issues that can be worked out and with among the 3 South Bay contractors as part of the overall motion to take a 6-foot diameter pipeline that's at the end of its service life, having increasing failures, and those failures will continue to escalate and we'll end up paying the cost.
So can I just jump in here? No motion is required. I think we meet the board policy requirement for general manager to follow up. You could probably sense that there are very strong opinions amongst the 5 of us on the subject, but I think you meet the minimum board policy requirement to move forward, right?
Well, what I would suggest is the 3 general managers of the South Bay Aqueduct contractors have already met with the general manager of East Bay Regional Park District staff. And I can tell you relocating the park facilities is going to require a lot more political power than I certainly have. However, just simply reoperating the reservoir and potentially lowering the intake of their treatment plant might be something that we can start with, and then I can report back to the board. Is that fair?
Sure.
And then what I'm thinking on the South Bay Aqueduct is potentially see if we can engage with DWR for them to do an assessment of the condition of the aqueduct and have the 3 contractors pay our share of that and then go from there. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. So I think I have the direction I need on that front.
May I suggest, in addition to an assessment, that they also come up with some proposed retrofits, possibly a structural liner, and they come up with a price of what it would take to do that.
Well, as part of the assessment, we can do a sort of a maybe alternative analysis or something. But I think using the incremental approach would get us actually better results, as opposed to saying that they're one of their most important facilities has reached the end of their useful life and then they get defensive. I think our board is telling me that the first step would be, hey, it's a vital asset that we rely on, and it's been installed now for quite a long time. We would like to see it evaluated.
I would suggest that administratively they could find, I think they'll find it to their advantage to possibly expand the concept of the California Water Fix to incorporate in that umbrella this type of a retrofit.
My suggestion to the board is we leave that out. They've already done CEQA on the California Water Fix. This isn't
Never going to happen, John.
This isn't part of that.
Well, putting a liner in an existing pipeline does not require CEQA. That's why.
True, but making it part of the California Water Fix, I think, will make the results more difficult to
I'm
achieve.
suggesting part, but that they can do it parallel, but it could be under the same motif and the same methodology.
Well, my comment is we don't want it to be part of the California Water Fix because that's going to stretch out forever. We have what is approaching end of life on the South Bay Aqueduct, and with the three contractors working together, we can get a lot more accomplished quicker than putting it on the back of California
No, I
Water
agree with
Fix.
that. Beneficiaries pay, and we're going to pay a smaller portion. The big load is going to have to be carried by Santa Clara.
So I just have one request. I agree with Director Sethy. You know, it's a lot easier for the three agencies to control our own destiny than having the entire state of California participate, to just be really frank about it. But actually the request is when you talk to the state about, evaluating the South Bay Aqueduct, can you also emphasize that we are interested in looking at seismic safety and reliability? It's just not this thing is old, is it going to stand up? It's more like this thing is old, what's going to happen when there's a Hayward quake or a
Luckily, I've been around long enough to know when that was done previously.
Uh-huh.
As a result, DWR purchased some extra pipe. So it'd be nice to know if they still have that extra pipe, or has it been used somewhere else, like at Oroville or something. So that in itself might be worth the cost of the assessment, just to find out if that's still around. So, agreed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. An excellent report.
Yeah.
Thanks to all of the
Great
staff
job,
for
Thomas.
sticking around.
And actually, thank you to everybody. I know I
Didn't we-
didn't vote
didn't we take a
yes
vote?
on
We
this
got a vote. Thank you.
item, but it's not a reflection of your work. I really appreciate everything you guys done, so thank you.
And I just have one really small quick thing, now that we know the result of the board action. To finalize a press release, I will work with Director Weed with a quote. Okay, thank you.
The magical quotes. All right, thank you. Let's take a short break then and come back in within 10 minutes. Okay, thank you. All right. Good evening. The time is 8:48. We're returning to open session. The next item then would be reports. We have the board committee reports, and we have, is there any comment related to any of the board committee reports?
For me.
I had one that I wanted to make a rhetorical comment on, and it was because I had thought it so long, and I'm trying to find out the exact one where it was. But we changed a position we're changing a position from environmental specialist to engineer. And for the individual, I think it's fine, but I had argued strongly that when we have these environmental positions in the past, that we change, that we not make it engineering, that we broaden the prospective employee pool, because the type of work is not, in my mind, traditional engineering and could involve sciences. For the current circumstance, it works well for the individuals, but I would hope that we can look at, as time permits, and try and establish the more a practice of having environmental work done by individuals with a broader category definition than engineer. It's not engineering in the traditional sense.
So I have the pleasure of hearing this item in committee along with Director Weed, and we had a long and drawn-out discussion. I think we will just say we have a difference in opinion. In this case, I believe reclassifying it to an engineering position actually allow our staff to perform more variety of work, and is actually a lot more flexible for the district to hire someone with a much larger skill set than just a environmental scientist. So I see it as a net benefit. So we'll just leave it at we have a difference in opinion. How's that?
Thank you.
So if the rest of the board is interested, that particular item is in the Operations and Water Quality Committee, item 1 in the summary minutes.
Thank you. If there's any other items that we wish to discuss, then we will move on then to operational reports. There is a particular one that we wish to bring to the attention of the board?
No, staff is available to respond to any questions, but we did not have any plans on making any special reports this evening.
Any questions? There being none, let's move then to the staff presentation on Washington Boulevard Interstate 680 Pipeline Improvement Project.
And Mr. Stevenson, our Manager of Engineering and Technology Services, has a extremely brief presentation that he was planning to present this evening.
I think it just became a little briefer. Yes, as District Secretary is pulling up a extremely brief presentation. Thank you. I'll just mention that this was a quick update that was requested during the August board meeting, and there was a request that staff provide a little bit of additional information about this project here at the October board meeting. So not to disappoint, here we are. The board probably remembers that this is a part of our water main renewal program. It's our Washington Boulevard Interstate 680 Pipeline Improvement Project, and it's being zoomed in and out as we speak. And this is essentially our first stab at a cured-in-place pipe liner system as a mechanism for renewing existing pipelines. So we're basically putting this through a trial run as we execute this project. You got that?
Hold on a second, sorry. Okay.
Okay, so what we'll see is that the project is actually a combination of two different work sites, one on Washington Boulevard, and despite the name, there's also another pipeline segment on Paseo Padre Parkway. So if you see the two site maps here, you can see, if I can get this guy to work, you can see on Paseo Padre where we're renewing a piece of pipeline that's between Grimmer Boulevard and Hancock. And this is a pipeline that crosses the San Francisco Bay Division pipelines 1, 2, and 5. And on Washington Boulevard, the pipeline that we're renewing spans Interstate 680 and crosses the Washington Boulevard Bridge. Both these pipelines have had maintenance issues in the past, and they've been difficult to maintain and repair. This Paseo Padre pipeline, I'm showing a bit of a profile view here, and it kind of gives a little bit of a spy into how this pipeline is configured with a vertical offset going down about 14 feet so that it passes underneath the San Francisco pipelines. So it's difficult to access and maintain that pipeline underneath the San Francisco right-of-way. And then on the Washington Boulevard pipeline, the pipeline itself is within the Washington Boulevard Bridge, and you can see it there with the yellow arrow. It's in the bridge cell. And that's a photo of what it looks like within the bridge. So the Paseo Padre pipeline is complete, and I'll show you a little bit of how some photos as to how that went. The Washington Boulevard pipeline project is coming up next. So for the Paseo Padre pipeline project, first step in any sort of lining project like this is to excavate sending and receiving pits. And so these are some photos of our own crews doing that work to prepare those pits. And within the pit, the next step is to remove a segment of pipe to prepare for lining. This is the pipe end that will be lined in this particular instance. To prepare the inside of the pipe, we use a little robot. Send the robot in there. We'll do some video inspection to confirm the condition of the inside of the pipe. Perform any cleaning as necessary. There's some attachments. There's some attachments that can be fitted on our little robot here that will do work on the inside of the pipe as required to prepare it for lining. And then that same robot can be fitted with an attachment that will install little plugs along service connections so that the pipe can be lined without the liner going into the service connections. So this is what the liner looks like as it's being installed. You have equipment at both ends of the pipeline segment that's to be lined. You have, on the sending side, you have the liner material itself being fed into the pipeline after having been impregnated with a two-part epoxy. I'll talk a little about in a second. And then on the receiving side, you have essentially a winch. It's pulling this liner through at a rate that's been determined based upon site conditions such as the length of the run, the temperature outside, the type of epoxy that was used, the diameter of the pipe, and so forth. So for this project, we're using the Aqua Pipe liner. This is it's a Class 4 AWWA liner, so that means it's fully structural, which means the liner itself can serve as a standalone pipeline even without the host pipe. So it has full structural capabilities, can withstand internal and external pressures and loading. And so this pipe system, this liner system has essentially, it's kind of a tube that's made up of multiple layers, and it's got an inner and outer polyester jacket, woven polyester, and then an inner lining surface made of polyurethane. Once the liner has been installed, there's water is introduced into the pipeline, into the liner to essentially inflate it up to a pressure of about 40 psi, and then hot water is circulated through the new liner, through the pipe, using equipment. It's shown here. There's some heating equipment and some pumping equipment that runs hot water through that pipe in order to cure the epoxy. So that process continues for about 4 hours, and then there's a 24-hour sort of curing period. After that liner's been installed, the little robot sent back in there to do another video inspection, ensure that everything was installed properly, and that robot will also reinstate those service connections by removing that rubber plug and the portion of liner that was over the service connection. So that's a photo of that same connection having been reinstated. The pipeline is then pressure tested, chlorinated, and bacteriological tested, just like any new pipeline installation. Closures are completed, and the pits are backfilled, and the site's restored. So that's the work that was done at Paseo Padre Parkway. It took about 3 weeks to do the whole process. And over at Washington Boulevard, we expect that that'll be a bit longer process, given we'll have more restrictions in terms of work hours, Plus, we'll have to do several pulls instead of just the one that we could do at Paseo Padre. It's a much longer run of pipe, closing in on 2,000 feet. So that's my quick update, and I'll leave you with my little photo here of our public information tent event that we held on September 28th, and our project team there by shown with Jason Ching, our project engineering supervisor, Arlen Gong, engineering technician, and our project manager, Kalpana Gandhi, who's done a great job on the project. So we're about halfway through. And of course, I would be happy to address any questions.
We had 2 members of the public that visited the tent that day, one who was walking her dog.
That's right. We had a pretty good turnout. We had one person that showed up based upon the flyers that we had sent, and then one that essentially had stumbled on the site because it looked interesting.
We try.
This is in service now?
Engagement.
So, I'm sorry?
I take it's in service now?
The Paseo Padre pipeline is in service. It's functioning well. Yes.
So it works?
Yep, it works.
It saved us a bunch of money?
Bottom line.
It's certainly, for these 2 installations, yes. It would have been much more expensive to replace these pipelines in a traditional way. Will that always be the case in every pipeline rehabilitation or renewal? Not necessarily. But here, given those sort of site conditions that I showed you, certainly this is far less expensive than traditional replacement.
Okay, thank you.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, first of all, thank you for showing me the site when it was being pulled. I thought that was really fascinating. My question is, how long can you do one pull, and how many pulls will Washington Boulevard take?
So the number of pulls that is required, or the length of the maximum length of pull that you can do, depends on a number of things, including the vertical or horizontal offsets, also the diameter of the pipe. They can only pull so much weight essentially through any given time. They say between 300 and 500 feet. Washington Boulevard, we're expecting 5 pulls.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. And no other comments to the general manager reports? 6 point. Is there any?
Yeah, we do have just a few items that we'd like to make the board aware of. Mr. Wunderlich is going to provide a brief report on late bill payment fees is the first item.
Right. So earlier this year, late bill payment fees, some new fees were instituted. We did have a 6-month waiver period, and those are now in full effect. We're beyond the 6-month period as of September 1st of this year. And just to give a quick recap, those fees consisted of a $5 fee for a reminder bill, a $20 fee for a door tag, or sometimes referred to as a 48-hour notice, and then also a $20 fee for service disconnection. To notify customers of these new fees, we included it in a bill message for an entire cycle. We also included a notice about this on every reminder bill that has gone out for the past 6 months. And we also included information about these new fees in the most recent version of the aqueduct. And so, based on what we're seeing, though, it seems like these efforts were maybe not quite as effective as we had hoped, and for many customers, it'll be actually receiving the late fee that leads to changed behavior. And so I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have about what's going on with the late fees. I also have a handout this evening, which is an FAQ document that's currently on the website, so you can see sort of some of the messaging that we've put out there.
Any questions or comments? I would be interested over time in monitoring this, and I failed in my argument that we should be charging interest on overdue bills, and then pocketing, and then as the interest was collected, put it into non-Prop 18 funding sources, so we could use it to fund programs that are not related to it. But at one time I understood we had as much as 20% of our bills were being floated and not being paid on a timely manner?
The number I'm familiar with is 15%.
Okay. So high.
Yeah, so that's I believe the number that was presented to the board earlier this year in the February meeting when these fees were adopted. And that's, you know, I haven't done the full math, but I think that's about what we're seeing to date, but we're hopeful with subsequent billing cycles as customers adapt that we'll see much lower numbers.
All right, thank you.
If there's no questions, the second item that I wanted to make the board aware of and receive final confirmation that our third strategic planning meeting is now scheduled for December 7th. So as far as we know, the entire board is available December 7th, which is great because that works incredibly well for staff. Thank you for being flexible. And lastly, it's very obvious based on the board's deliberations today on the California water fix that this board is not interested in actually experiencing in real life what today is. Today is imagine a day without water. And so I appreciate your passion about making sure that water supply is reliable for our customers at ACWD. So with that, that concludes GM reports for this evening.
Thank you. Next are directors' comments. Start off with Director Sethy on the September 13-14 trip to Hetchetchee.
I'll keep this brief here. The trip up to Hetchetchee was comprehensive. We started on the peninsula, went through the different SFPUC assets, and then made a trip up to Calaveras Reservoir to see the progress there. At the time that they were doing work on that, on the 14th, which was our board meeting day, they were at elevation 630 and the base is at 540. So today, when Director Weed and I were up there, they were already up to elevation 650. And you can really, it's only 20 feet, but you really notice it. And the ultimate height of the dam will be around 772. So that was good to see the progress there. We went up to Moccasin afterward to go through all the facilities at that location. Drove by Eleanor and Cherry on our way up to Hetchetchee. When we arrived, we were detained for about 3-4 hours because they had a landslide on the road leading to the Hetchetchee site that had just occurred minutes before we had arrived because we had a pretty terrific lightning storm. Mm-hmm. And so the U.S. Park Service refused to clear the road for us, which left us in a predicament. And we had to call down to Moccasin. Steve Ritchie did this to get a bulldozer pulled all the way up. And if you know what kind of incline that is, that took a long time. So we had a very late dinner. We're out on the dam after midnight. And I was with Leonard Ash, one of our employees. And we got to share a cabin together, which was fun. So that's all I have to say about Hetchetchee. It was just extremely comprehensive, very, very educational. Oh, I might add, we went on a close to a 6-mile hike the second morning, and then had to go 5 levels down inside O'Shaughnessy Dam and back up. This is after the hike, which is, pretty rigorous to go all the way out to the falls. And that was my first occasion ever inside of a dam. So it was really interesting to see how this was designed for the time period that it was designed. It's like incredible engineering when you think about all aspects of what's up there. And then I made it all the way back to San Mateo, and I had to rush over here for a board meeting.
All right, thank you. Next item is a report by Director Sethy and myself on the Association of California Water Agencies Region 5 event in Goleta, which is adjacent to the University of California, Santa Barbara. Wish me to take that?
My comment is real brief. The focus was on recycled water and water reuse. And we had a very good attendance from everybody around Region 5, from the Bay Area all the way down to Santa Barbara, Ventura. I thought it was the best Region 5 meeting I had been to the whole time I've been on the board. It was, the tour of the water facilities in Goleta were good, the sanitation plant, all of the presentations that where people are using recycled water, water reuse, and giving us the business cases for it, the applications in their communities. It was just terrific. It really was. I learned a lot.
It was remarkable. We had a chance to take a look at the Goleta water treatment plant, which, although sized for well over 20 MGD, is running at that time, much of the time, at only 1 MGD.
8. Turns out it's 8.
8, but they have lowered it down to as low as 1, and so it made an interesting operation. We had a presentation on the Santa Barbara's next effort iteration on desalination, and they're pouring a lot of money at it. The first time they spent $40 million and produced 40 acre-feet of water before they disassembled it. This time they're trying again, and they're encountering some issues on financing. And once again, the water supply is such that they may not need it. The issue of reuse and recycling and all the other elements they've gone through, when asked the question, well, if you had the ability to get water transfers and have them delivered via the State Water Project, wouldn't that make more sense? And the answer was clearly yes, and all those programs would probably fall off the table financially. So, interesting event, interesting activities, and Santa Barbara lives on at the end of one of the, much like we do, of the South Bay Aqueduct. One of the, they're tied into the State Water Project. What I did find interesting was Carpinteria is going with AMI, but using, as with COSIDE, ultrasonic meters. Next is a report from Directors Akbari and Sethy on the California Special Districts Association Annual Conference in Monterey, California.
I'll let you go first in alphabetical order.
Okay. Well, I'll keep it pretty brief. I went to a few of their breakout sessions, being their open government session on how to utilize social media and your website more effectively. The next one I went to was on open data, which I thought was fascinating as a data geek myself, and yeah, I thought there were a lot of opportunities for us there. And then I went to a few sessions on employee engagement and how to attract new labor and how to win that war of talent. I know I gave Bob one of the handouts that I received yesterday, and I have notes on each of these sessions, so I'm going to send it over to in an email to our general manager, because I think there was a lot that we could take away from those breakout sessions, and that we can hopefully bring to the district.
Great, thank you.
I was there for 3 days, Monday through Wednesday. On the first day, I went down there for the Moss Landing Harbor District Tour and the Elkhorn Slough Tour. I highly recommend it to anyone here on the board, their families, staff. go down there. It's well worth it for a nominal admission price of $35. You'll enjoy yourselves. But what really piqued my interest on that tour was we made a pit stop at the Sand City desal plant, which is a small desal plant. It was the first one operational in California. 300 acre-feet of water, about 100 million gallons per year. And they are, you must be familiar with it because you went down to Fort Ord a lot, right? I found it interesting because it is brackish seawater. And so I went through a little bit of a learning exercise here with our staff on the difference between doing seawater desalination right here through muck and mud versus going...
There's Slender Well under the sand.
Right.
Yep.
So they have wells that they have about a half a mile out into the ocean that they're drawing water from, and then they re-inject the concentrate, which is roughly at the same level of seawater. They re-inject that below the sea, so it doesn't affect the wildlife there. So it was really a... And the gentleman who was president of CSDA this year is the board chair of the Harbor District, and so he was giving his own personal tour, and he grew up in Monterey. So he really knew all the details about this desal plant that made it a very rich presentation. Let's see here, I attended a, which I hope will benefit the board here, the right way to a better board best practices. So I'll try to practice what I learned. I went to a fascinating session called CalPERS Update and How to Prepare for and Survive a CalPERS Audit. Scary stuff. And I brought back one of the handouts because I thought it would be helpful in terms of going through a checklist. I didn't attend this session thinking that Alameda County Water District was under any threat of an audit. But what I did learn was all of the ways that you can do things preventatively to end up in that kind of situation, and what are some of the very nuisance little things that can trigger a CalPERS audit. And so I thought maybe we might want to go through this checklist and maybe have it reviewed like in the Finance Committee sometime down the road.
Sure. We'll take a look at it.
It was a great session. Then I attended a Hanson Bridget session, which was equally impressive, called A New Look at Design Immunity, Expanding Protection for Public Entities. And I had no knowledge of what design immunity meant. I was there with the general manager of another water district, and she said she had never heard of it. Everybody in the room, there were about 20 attendees. It was a small session. But everybody said, wow, there are so many protections that we didn't even realize that we have if we designed our insurance policies better, if we put certain practices into place, if we had proper legal reviews. So I briefly talked with Patrick about this after I came back, and they informed me, your colleagues there, that you are the leading believer in this, so I'm assuming that we have a lot of influence on our projects here with some design immunity protections. But I later attended the session from Sidrama on public property protection and liability issues that come up. And the two back-to-back really give you an interesting perspective on how to protect the property rights of a district. Yeah, I attended the session on winning the war for talent with Director Akbari. I attended another on turning public perceptions of your district from negative to positive, dealing with opposition, complaints, angry customers, negative media coverage. Not that we're going through any of that right now, but these were all good reminders of what are best practices in terms of handling different kinds of situations. So that was my attendance for CSDA.
Thank you. Item 7.4 is report from each of the 5 directors on the Oroville Dam Spillway construction site tours on October 3rd.
I guess I'll start, but first of all, Director Sethy, I lost track of the Sand City project. Last time I checked, they put in the test wells under the sand. So I have not been to Fort Ord for quite a while since I'm no longer the project manager. But anyway, back to Oroville. That was a great trip. It's actually really nice to see the sheer scale of the project. It is also nice to actually talk to Randy. I can't remember his last name, Fisher? So what was nice is to see the fact that they are actually on schedule, that the spillway, the main spillway, will actually be finished, mostly finished, by November. And actually, he was pretty confident that November 1st might be the date, not November 30th. So that was really good to know. We also had a good discussion about the district's share of the repair. So we were told that FEMA could potentially cover up to 75% of the total cost, and state water contractors are responsible for 25% or less, depending on if flood control going to cost share with us, and whichever portion that state water contractors has to bear, we have 1%. So that is actually a much more comfortable number for me, because right now it's just a really big project that requires a lot of money. It also gives us an opportunity to talk about water supply. What we have learned is in order to accommodate another high rainfall season, they have actually artificially lowered the water level in the lake. That would potentially have water supply impact to us down the road, because that just means that there's less water to be released to downstream users. Although there was some arguing about they pre-released the water, it could be stored somewhere else. The truth is, due to the high rainfall season, almost all our storage is full. So that additional water that's released most likely is out in Pacific Ocean somewhere. So there potentially could be some water supply issues that I believe Thomas is going to look into different model scenarios to quantify the impact to us. So that was really good. So the last bit is the really geeky part. As an engineer, it was pretty exciting to see how much concrete was poured. And this whole concept of not being a civil engineer, this roller
compacted concrete.
Roller compacted concrete.
Laid, not poured.
It was impressive
soup.
how much concrete you could pour without have to put in rebar, which is very old school, how I grew up. And you still have to require integrity. So that was actually really good. It's both for me personally a learning opportunity, but I think we also found out some pertinent information for the district that is very useful. And the last bit, it brings to mind how far away we take our water, just based on that really long drive to Oroville. It actually is a reminder that where our water came from and how far away and how much infrastructure is between ACWD and the original water source, and how much maintenance that we're responsible for.
Thank you. Dr. Gunther?
Yeah, I think the breadth and scope of that project, you can't get your hands around it until you get up there and look at it. Just completely fascinating, the fact they got to close off the road with California Highway Patrol. There was one thing mentioned, knock wood, but the injury rate on the project, one person, phenomenal, size of that thing. And that person was down on the river. The scope of what they're trying to do, I don't think has been captured. And I think another thing that was never really captured was what the emergency spillway really does. That message was totally lost on the public. The emergency spillway is just there to protect the dam, not Marysville or Warville. They were going to be in trouble if this emergency spillway went. Basically, the emergency spillway is there to protect the dam, to protect everything else downstream. So, interesting how the message I found was lost. I kind of got that hint earlier, but to see it there, I wish I could remember the number that they gave if the dam failed versus the emergency spillway. The difference is huge. But the scope of that project, when you go down that road and look up on it, watching those huge trucks moving that concrete, we're sitting there for a couple minutes, and these things are just going back and forth in a circle, dumping concrete. And these trucks are, the back of the truck, the bed is probably as big as the seats. Just huge amounts of concrete being poured constantly with their own plant up there. Like I said, you can't, the picture doesn't do it justice.
Thank you. Professor Akbari?
Well, I think the directors before me pretty much summarized everything that I had to say. I mean, you really cannot understand the scope of the project until you're there, and it is quite impressive, and to see that they are on schedule. Like Director Huang was saying, they were confident November 1st that they will be completed. So, I mean, from our perspective, all the more power to them. We want to see that completed on time, and we got to talk to them a little bit about the cost, and like Director Huang was mentioning, up to 75% will hopefully be covered by FEMA, and then we'll be on the hook for the rest of it, for 1% of the rest of it. So I think that's something that we'll definitely need to follow very, very closely, see how much they actually do get from FEMA.
Good comments from everybody. I simply thought it was breathtaking. It really is. It's just unbelievable. And I have been most familiar with what's going on over at Calaveras the last several years, and you hear that's the largest ongoing construction project in Northern California, right, starting in early 2012. And then you go up to Oroville, and it's like, oh my God, it's like 12 times the size or something, It's quite a sight to see. I want to focus on what Director Weed and I were there the preceding day, and we had set up some appointments. So from 8 to 10 on Monday morning, we had a lady from DWR who gave us a personal tour of the Feather River Fish Hatchery, and that was a different kind of fish hatchery from other ones that I've seen, where they actually selectively kill the male and female Chinook salmon in this case, and take out the eggs from the females and then inseminate those eggs and put them into trays for distribution into the river system later on. And some of these Chinook salmons were, 40 pounds or more. They were really interesting, the whole tour of what was going on there. But John and I, the representative from DWR, gave us insightful information about the floods that had occurred, and that they were right up to the level of the fish hatchery, and then where it was up on side of the cliffs and everything, and the water just barely not going over the levees straight into the city of Oroville. When you start to realize the width of the river, the height that the water was at the flood, when the spillway was falling apart, that in itself is something to see. We spent a couple of hours with South Feather Water and Power. Cal-Am is the primary water provider for the city of Oroville, and South Feather Water and Power is the primary supplier to the east, south, and southwest of the city. And they have pre-1914 water rights up there off the Feather River. And if you notice, there was a small power station next to Hyatt Powerhouse that is operated by South Feather. So they get 85% of their revenue from power revenue, and they have a split workforce, about 61 people split in half between water and power. So power is subsidizing their water rates up there. They're about to lose their power agreement with PG&E, their purchase power agreement, as soon as 2 or 3 years. So they're facing a situation where the general manager has to restructure the entire company so that it's self-sustaining on the water side, and could cause quite a few disruptions in the community, eruptions from members of the community. While we were there at South Feather, we were given a tour by the GM and the water operations manager of the new treatment plant that they're building on top of an old one. And they're still keeping the old one operational. It's a little bit of a nightmare from what we saw. But I wanted to bring something to the board's attention here. I did talk to Steve Peterson about this and Bob Shaver. Something really caught the eye of both Director Weed and I, and that was they have installed in a new shed a horizontal centrifuge to handle all their sludge. And it was, when we asked why they went in that direction, because it was the first time either one of us had seen one of these in operation in a water district. We had seen it in sanitary districts, of course. They said it was basically cost, efficiency, and cleanliness. There's virtually no odor in the room. And if you've been to TP2, you know what a messy site that is, right?
I was there right after it was clean, so that doesn't count.
Oh, okay. So, I would like to make a recommendation, the directors ask here to have this referred to the Operations and Water Quality Committee. And Steve said that he would investigate this kind of setup, and he's going to talk to perhaps the water operations manager up there. What that fellow told us was that 20 years ago, when he looked at this technology, it was not worth going to. 15 years later, or 15 years ago, it was not worth putting in. 10 years ago, they were still struggling with the technology. But he said in the last decade, they have just come miles ahead, and it's compact. This is a 21 MGD plant, and they've got this very compact setup for handling all their sludge. So when he talked about cost, efficiency, cleanliness, ease of trucking things out, I thought, well, maybe it's time we took a relook at this. I know we have in the past. Not for quite some time. I think it was over 10 years ago. So I'd like to refer that to committee.
Sure. We can update the committee on when we evaluated different technology, what the results were, why our results might be different than what they would experience up there. I bet we have a lot more solids in the water than they do, given that our water goes through the delta. It's one of the benefits of the tunnels, actually, in that we'll receive a lot less organic material. It should be a lot easier water to treat. But certainly, we'd be happy to explain what we've done before and why we're where we're at, and then go from there.
Well, I would just say we're going to reach end of life on our current operation setup that was put in 1993 at TP2. It could be, I don't know, 3-5 years, whenever it is. It might be nice to keep something like this on our radar screen for when we do need to make the investment to upgrade.
I agree with you. When I first came on board, when I toured TP2, my first question is, why do we have a filter press?
Yeah.
So, yeah, looking at it,
And
it's always a
technology
good thing.
changes,
Yeah.
so we're happy to explain what we're doing and why we selected that approach.
Going into other people's treatment plants is a great learning experience, because you always pick up one thing here, one thing there, then you find out something else. So let me quickly close on the other two things. One of the requests I would make to staff is, if we go up to Oroville, all the way up there, that we should have a chance to visit the visitor center. Nobody really had a chance to do that on our
We did.
the trio that we had. They just put us into a presentation right away and opened up the doors, put us into a presentation, and we never got to experience what was there to learn about the dam. So fortunately, John and I had a meeting, were able to persuade the Butte County Historical Society to open up their museum, even though they were closed normally on Sunday and Monday. And we got this really nice presentation on the history of water up in that area. Who would expect that at a museum? But, you know, Feather River's big up there. And then they have a complete learning display on the construction of Oroville Dam. So that was our chance to really see all those old photographs and what had happened. So it made the visit there quite worthwhile. And then the last thing was we visited River Bend Recreation and Parks District and met with the general manager there. She was the winner at the CSDA conference of having implemented the most innovative program in the state of California for a special district. So John and I thoroughly enjoyed meeting with her, and I'm going to turn over one of the nice, interesting revelations that she disclosed to us in reference to Sidrama, if you wish to.
Well, go ahead quickly. They have, do you want me to state it, or do you wish to?
No, you can go ahead.
They had they got their park flooded out. Sidrama accepted a $10 million insurance claim with a $250,000 deductible. They accept $130,000 of that for the time that they were shut down, so now they only have to come up with $120,000, and I was surprised that they would do that for a flood.
They already got a check for $2.4 million.
So we're part of Sidrama, and we're part of that insurance pool, so it can be remarkably beneficial to have that insurance company. Of the other items, if I could quickly go on.
Done.
The fish hatchery, there was one of the side stories by the tour guide. It said, and there was apparently this has been given to an investigative reporter. Chinook salmon, they had 20 million eggs. Apparently the feeling was that they were too successful, so they were told to destroy 7 million of them. They didn't want to be too successful. We got to keep the need there, was the feeling. So they were not at all pleased with that direction. And the Chinook, to understand when around Chinook, when they did Prop 1 funding, the Water Commission was offering up to $100,000 per Chinook salmon per year in capital construction costs. So this was, she thought, they were dismayed. On the water treatment plant at South River Water and Power District, They have a 21 MGD plant operating it with 6 persons. They operate it 24 hours a day, but they do not man it 24 hours a day. They put security personnel on board and when then not in operation. Found the same situation at Goleta, that they were not manning their water treatment plants 24 hours, although they operated 24 hours.
See them do that with Delta Water again.
Yeah,
with
so
a
that may be, there
conventional
may
plant.
be some changes there. At Hetchy, the story we were given by a representative was that they identified initially 24 potential causes of the failure. They had to rush the design, so they addressed all 24 potential causes, oversized rebar and other issues. That was one of the reasons that the cost was significantly higher.
You mean Orville?
Orville, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Hetchy, Orville, if I misspoke. At Orville, that they now have feel in their final draft that the problem was not maintaining the drainage under a portion of the spillway. The water built up and literally lifted the deck off of the ground, that the anchors were in part not fully designed because of did not have, when they found the material that they were drilling into wasn't as strong, but it was essentially they had released water 19 years over the past 40-odd years, and without a problem, and this may have well been a maintenance failure. $1 billion maintenance failure leading to 180,000 people being evacuated. So that was the gist of it. They're charging ahead. On the security side, I found it curious that since it was they brought in 3 additional CHP officers, had rings of security. Why? Because that was the FEMA was going to pay for it, and there was no sense of an analysis of what the real problems and threats were and how they were applying the security. It was just throw security at the issue. You had CHP officers sitting in their vehicles all day without moving, and I questioned it, and they said, well, sometimes we have some of the contractors speeding their trucks, and they have to maintain some control. But it was the application of security did not seem to apply to the risk involved. Those are my insights, and I would hope that we can do more of those. It was a fascinating trip.
Director Akbari, did you indicate that you would like to do a brief report on your SFPUC Peninsula tour?
Sure. Well, I went
It's
with...
not on the agenda.
I went with Director Weed.
Okay.
I mean, I'll keep it pretty...
You don't... If Director Weed covered it, it's fine.
No, I did.
No,
I covered
no,
this
yeah,
one. This
right.
was a separate tour.
Okay.
Yeah, this was a separate tour.
We had another one today, but that's...
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of tours over the past couple weeks. This was a Bosca Peninsula tour hosted by SFPUC. We got to see the Pogus Water Tower and Felicitos Dam, among a few other sites. I think most fascinating, I got to speak with someone who works over at Redwood City, and they have just implemented AMI, and so I got to chat with him about a lot of that. And one of the big things that he told me is that they didn't really give any of their residents opt-out. They didn't have an opt-out policy, and so which I believe PG&E did have an opt-out policy, and they had many people request to opt out, and so I thought that was a requirement. Turns out it's not, which was an interesting development for me.
Well, thank you. So this will save us having to put an agenda item on next time. San Francisco has 22,000 acres on the peninsula. They went to good detail to talk about the levels of environmental and development protection they have at the city, county, state, federal, and even international level. I asked about the 38,000 acres they had in southern Alameda County, and they said there are none. So It's a remarkable piece of property, and thank you.
So, I think we can go to item 8 really quickly.
Let's move then, which is the potential lease or purchase of property at 4530 Enterprise Drive, Fremont, California.
So, the issue here with item 8 is there is a potential opportunity for the district that has arisen. Mr. Stevenson will be covering that, and then my suggestion is when we go to closed session, however, that we cover item 9.2 before item 9.1 because Mr. Berkheimer here has been patiently waiting. I said I thought we might get to that closed session as early as 8. Once again, I've been terribly wrong in my estimation of how much time things take, so I think he'd appreciate being able to go home a little earlier. So that's kind of what we have in mind. And then on item 8, the question is the board significantly interested in the opportunity that Mr. Stevenson will present, that you are willing to go to closed session to talk essentially price and term?
Without objection, should we?
Right, so, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
We have a presentation.
So, here's a photo of the site in question. This is a property that's immediately adjacent to our ACWD headquarters facility, and you can see this little green box down there. This is that site that's immediately adjacent to our access road off of Enterprise Drive. The property is about 20,000 square feet and includes a single 1,800 square foot building, which is approximately half office space and half warehouse space. The district's existing headquarters site is currently fully utilized, and expansion to include this property could provide additional equipment and vehicle yard space, parking, warehousing, shop, and potentially a small space for administrative uses. That said, staff have not yet conducted a thorough review of all space needs nor available options for site expansion, which is something we'd normally do before presenting alternatives to the board. This is simply an opportunity that fell into our lap as the property became vacant and went on the market last month. The property is being offered by the owner for lease. However, based upon preliminary discussions with the property owner's representative, it's staff's understanding that the owner may also consider an offer to purchase the site, although that would not be the owner's preference. Staff has done preliminary work to determine the fair market value of the site for lease or purchase and have received an offer to lease from the property owner. If the board wishes to consider the potential lease or purchase of the property and provide appropriate direction to staff, it would need to designate the ACWD real property negotiators under this agenda item 8, and then convene into closed session under agenda item 9.1, as the general manager points out. And that would be to review additional information and discuss potential price and terms of payment. Accordingly, if the board is interested, then staff's recommendation is that the board designate me, Ed Stevenson, and Judy Rudder, who's our Development Services Supervisor, as agency real property negotiators. And I'd be happy to address any questions.
So are you enticed enough to talk further about the potential opportunity in closed session?
I am.
Yes? Yes. You've got 5.
So then somebody should make a motion to designate, if you're going to follow the staff recommendation, Ed Stevenson and Judy Rotter as the designated ACWD real property negotiators.
I'll make a motion to move to staff recommendation.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call,
Directors Sethy,
Aye.
Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
Huang,
Aye.
and Weed.
Aye. All right, at this time, we then can go to closed session. Is there any report that needs to be made prior to closed session?
Yes, so I'm happy to do the report. It is now 9:47, and the board is going to convene into closed session for 2 separate items. 9.1 is pursuant to California Government Code Section 54956.8 to confer with real property negotiators, property 4530 Enterprise Drive, Fremont, California. Agency negotiators are Ed Stevenson and Judy Rotter, negotiating party Jerry Ibarra, and under negotiation price and terms of payment. Item 9.2 is pursuant to California Government Code Section 54957.6, conference with labor negotiators, agency designated negotiators Robert Shaver, Jennifer Rogers, and Glenn Berkheimer.
employee organizations, operating engineers Local 3, and ACWD Operators Association, and those items will be actually flipped in chronological order, but that's the way they're listed on the agenda.
Thank you. Without objection, we will now move to closed session. Thank you. We are back in open session. The time is 10:35. I will turn it over to the district attorney to report out what we did in closed session.
Great. Thank you, President Weed. Board convened in closed session pursuant to California Government Code Section 54956.8, conference with real property negotiators, property 5430 Enterprise Drive, Fremont, California. Agency negotiators Ed Stevenson, Junie Rotter, negotiating party Jerry Ibarra, under negotiation price and terms of payment, and in that closed session, the board gave direction to the agency negotiators. For the second closed session, pursuant to California Government Code Section 54957.6, conference with labor negotiators, agency designated negotiators Robert Shaver, Jennifer Rogers, and Glenn Berkheimer, employee organizations, operating engineers Local 3, and ACWD Operators Association. In that closed session, the board gave direction to the agency designated labor negotiators, and that concludes the open session reports.
Thank you.